All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. We've got Drew Sample, the awesome farmer, back. And we've also got a dude named Tim. And we're going to talk about Postmodernism and Space, the essay on space in the Cambridge Companion of Postmodernism that we've been going through a little bit on other episodes, such as the Introduction to Postmodernism with Shane Kennedy, and then we did an episode on art, film, and literature, and then we did another one on just film and literature. So we're going to get into space this time. So you guys want to start off by introducing yourself there to anyone who doesn't know you?
Sure. I'm Drew Sample. I'm the host of the Sample Hour, and I've been on an episode here before, and I feel really good because I was the first guy to ever have Tim Keefe on his podcast. Now he's this big philosophy sensation, and I added him into the Mixed Mental Arts chat.
Oh, I didn't know that. Cool.
Yeah. So I feel good about that. I just want to inflate my ego before you started talking, Tim.
Yeah. Drew was the gateway drug to MMA.
It's a good way.
Literally, he was the gateway.
But not the fighting kind, because Tim doesn't like that stuff. Especially when they go on Rogan to have conversations.
I'm a thinker, not a fighter.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm a dude named Tim. We'll just leave it at that.
That's right.
Yeah.
That'll be my moniker from now on.
Okay.
Okay. So we have a special episode because Drew Sample, whom I have met in person a couple of different times and actually stayed with at his humble abode in Columbus, Ohio, is now here to talk about postmodernism. So I am stoked.
You stayed in my, even when I wasn't there one time, you stayed
That's
there.
Right. That's right.
And you hung out with Rich. Yeah.
I did. Well, Rich could come on and talk about this stuff sometimes.
Hey, I met a guy that I think you met at the weekend with Thaddeus Russell this weekend in Pittsburgh. This guy named he's actually a dude named Ben.
A dude.
His real name is Ben. He's not a dude named Ben, but his name is Ben.
He's a dude named Ben, but not a dude named Ben.
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
Oh, that's getting into some like Heidegger type philosophy.
That's right. Yeah. It's like the ontological difference.
Yeah.
I just figured we'd start the show off right. But for real, remind me to talk to you about this afterward because he was a pretty interesting cat, and I'm sure you talked to him at that event. You went to that event, right?
I did. Did he remember me?
I think so. Yeah, I said something, and I haven't talked to you in a while, so I didn't even hear if when you said hi to me to Thaddeus Russell for me, if he big timed me or if he was like, "Oh, I love Drew Sample," or what did he say? So.
Yeah,
this show so far is very much so about my ego.
Of course, right? Yeah.
I can retitle it Drew Sample's ego.
That's right.
The postmodern view of Drew Sample's ego.
The postmodern Drew.
What does it mean to question what Drew Sample's ego is? How do we define it?
Is Drew actually a simulacra?
Is he?
It could be.
Is he?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been accused of much worse.
I'm sure you have. Yes. And I've been called much worse too, besides a dude named Tim.
Oh, named Tim. Me too. I haven't even been called a dude named Tim.
That's true.
That's true. When you do, you have to let us know.
But he is wearing a Tim Pool hat style. Yeah. He is wearing the Tim Pool beanie, which I've spoken out against very strongly on multiple occasions. I'm not a fan.
I'm the stoner philosophy version of Tim Pool.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. No wonder why you're so mellow.
Yeah, because Tim Pool is not mellow.
He is not mellow.
No, he's not.
Yes. Okay, gentlemen. So should we dive right into it? We got some material to cover. All right. Yeah. So because we have Drew as our third interlocutor. Drew, you said you were listening to the first episode of the marathon I did with James last year on James and the Giant podcast, in which I really spilled my guts and I talked at great length, 9 hours worth of postmodernism. So now that you've listened to the first episode and I was going through that with James, can you, just to kick us off, give us in your own words, please, what you understand by postmodernism?
So with that, and then also talking to Thaddeus Russell and everything, I mean, to me, my first thought of postmodernism was just a lens to kind of to put things through to have an understanding. And then after listening to you talk about it, it just kind of seems like the evolution of structuralism from what I got from that, from the very base, and then you start peeling into postmodernism. But also too, you said it's more of a kind of, it's more of art and literature than it was of philosophy, is what you said, I believe.
Yeah, among many other things.
Yeah, it's a complex thing, but I think we can all, like, I agree that people don't really seem to understand what it is, and they seem to have strong opinions about it, which is super fucking annoying.
Yes.
Yeah, it really is.
That's what spurred me to try to do something about it, because, academically trained as I am, I had studied postmodernism, and it was a thing from the 70s, 80s, and the 90s, where it kind of reached a high watermark, and then it dropped off the face of the earth until people like Jordan Peterson brought it back into public discourse, and that's where the straw manning began.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, oh, I'm getting so tired of this. And because of being a trained academic, it really gets my goat, because it's just a bunch of, in my opinion, pseudo-intellectuals that are talking about something they have no idea what it is. Now,
isn't that most of the internet?
Is that most of the internet? Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I was going to try to set the record straight, and I just talked at length about it with James, and Andrew and I have been going through the Cambridge Companion to try to flesh some of this stuff out with it. But I'm just talking with a very small handful of people, and I don't even know if it's really a corrective to those who first come to it, and they're just like, well, what's all this postmodernism thing they're talking about? And you're just like, holy shit, I didn't realize there was that much there.
Well, why are they being accused? Why are all the SJWs being accused of being postmodernists? Like, aren't we all technically postmodernists? Like, isn't Donald Trump a postmodern president?
Yes.
Yes. That's the right answer.
Like, to me, it's well, I think it's mainly because of Derrida, and then the other one,
Foucault?
No, Foucault was not. Foucault was more libertarian, which is weird if people read Foucault. And I first heard about Foucault because of Cody R. Wilson when I saw him on the he was on Glenn Beck's show talking about his 3D printed guns, and he was talking about reading Foucault, and I think it was Crime and Punishment, and so I briefly read
Discipline and Punishment.
No, Discipline and Punishment.
Discipline and Punishment. Yeah.
Dostoevsky is Crime and Punishment.
Okay, yeah. So, and I guess a lot of the, and I don't know, like, and one thing too is a lot of philosophy and food and great things about Western culture really originate in France. So I think it's I think that's kind of interesting as well, because I know, so Tim and I know each other because of Charles Hugh Smith, and him and I have talked in detail, and he, like, most of what capitalism and the ideas of capitalism credit really came from was the French first. And so it makes a lot of sense to me that this originally came from France and French philosophers who kind of explain it. But I haven't totally, like, I still have 6 more hours, and actually possibly 7 more hours to have my full understanding of the Tim Keefe lecture on postmodernism. But I actually am really looking forward to it, and I haven't dove deep into it. Like, I started listening to it, and I was like, man, Tim sounds really good on this episode, but somehow this other guy's sound quality isn't that good. And then, but you sounded, James's wasn't that good, and he apologized for it, but yours sounded great. So I was super proud, Tim, that you, on your first podcast, not only did you do 9 hours of lecture, but then also that you had great sound. And and you sound great now too.
Well, thanks, Drew.
You're welcome. I just want you to say I love you, and proud of you.
Thanks. That warms the cockles of my heart. Thanks. Okay, so that's Drew's meandering response to what postmodernism is. Andrew, so we've been going over this for the past several episodes. How about you fill in some of Drew's gaps?
Yes, please.
Well, there's like another thing that people often seem to get wrong about postmodernism is that one part that you had mentioned there, Drew, was that it's more like art, a way of examining art and literature, than it is a philosophy. And like if there's anything philosophical about it, it's like a lens, like you said. It's a way of looking at things, and then I think it's also always important to make the distinction between postmodernism and the postmodern. So the postmodern era and postmodern society. So if you look at like historical periods, we live in the postmodern era, and then there's also the postmodern condition, which is sort of related to the postmodern era, but it's like sort of like a sociological condition that's part of living in the postmodern era in a way. So, and then this term that Jordan Peterson throws around, postmodern neo-Marxist, it's basically an oxymoron, because Marxists and postmodernists hate each other, and like Marxists are authoritarian and absolutist, and postmodernists are generally anti-authoritarian and anti-absolutist. So I think that those are like a few of the other key points about it.
That makes sense. I've heard Thaddeus Russell kind of say that, but not necessarily say that. But that makes a lot of sense. Also, too, the term neo-Marxist is kind of a new term too, which I've heard a lot of people challenge that as well.
Same thing with cultural Marxists.
Cultural Marxists,
which is another pain in the ass term to me. It's just like, give it a rest.
Oh, yeah. Explain that one a little more, Tim.
A cultural Marxist, well, that I would say is probably the oxymoron. And I mean, the only place I really seen any kind of credible connection is with the Frankfurt School, who themselves were Marxist influenced, but you couldn't say that they were cultural Marxists. That's just it's a term that really bugs the shit out of me. It really does.
Now, isn't also to like isn't the connection between the so-called cultural Marxism and the cultural Marxism, but mainly the postmodernist communist idea, like neo-Marxist, isn't that because of Derrida and the other postmodern the well-known postmodernist, I guess?
Well, okay, so let's back up a minute. Let's go back to the term postmodernist itself, because I've heard some. No, again, I first came in contact with this stuff way back in the early '90s when I was an undergrad, and then when I went on to grad school, because again, that was the high watermark for that theory at the time. But some scholars that I listen to, they throw around the term postmodern. Well, what does it mean? It means post-truth, post-science. You could even throw out things like fake news or whatever it is. It's just this catch-all term, this boogeyman type of a term for something that shows that journalism or society or whatever it is have gone off the rails.
It's like that reminds me of the last episode we did with Polish Christian Bale on Deleuze, and we were talking about his thoughts on Plato, and you were saying that Platonism is often pejorative when people use it.
Right, it's a pejorative term, but in itself, it refers to that you have a commitment to the existence of abstract entities.
Yeah,
that's just what it means. And those who do not believe in the existence of an abstract entities will tag somebody as a Platonist.
Yeah.
But there's more to Deleuze's criticism of Platonism, which happens to be somewhat political.
Yeah.
Because the ideas, we won't go too much into this because we've already covered that in the episode, is that the ideas root things, and they do not acknowledge like the flux of things. But that's where I'm going to draw the line. I'm not going to go too far down that with that.
Sure.
But also backing up a minute, there's a very good book I came across. It's a book on theory, and it was really good because it takes certain lines for certain figures like Lacan, Derrida, and so on, and it has an explication of them. And I think it was in that book or was in another book where it really broke down postmodernism the catch-all term, in a much more acceptable way than I've seen before. And I'll just briefly go through it. So the author breaks it down into 3 different categories. And he was focusing on the modern, not the postmodern. So first you have modernization, a verb, or noun, modernizing, the verb. You have modernity, which is a state of affairs. And then you have modernism, which is a movement. So let's look at those in turn. Modernization is taking things from a more primitive state to a more complex state. You know, we have flush toilets. We've taken advantage of those for at least 100 some years. Modernization took things from you took a shit in the woods to running water and you took a shit in the toilet. Okay, very simple. That's the modernizing process. Modernity is the state of affairs that one finds oneself in with, you know, mechanical features, advanced technology, all these things. So you could easily say that everybody exists in some shape or form in modernity, and modernity continues, even though things are much more complex now than they were 30 or 40 years ago. Then you have modernism, which you could take the post, put it onto postmodernism. It makes a little bit more sense because Andrew, you and I were talking about the arts. Okay. Now here, in my opinion, is really where you can apply the term postmodernism because it is something that comes after modernism as an artistic movement. Okay.
Yeah.
And those who know something about the history of art, they know of the modernist period, which started in the late 19th century and extended into like the 1950s or so, around the time that, you know, in the 1950s and 60s when pop art started to emerge. So you could delineate it as Andy Warhol and everything beyond that. Not every artist, of course, is postmodern. Thing that was before Andy Warhol is modernist. Okay? Does that simplify things?
Yes.
So with the breakdown, you can't say there's a postmodernization. It really doesn't make sense. You can say there is postmodernism as kind of an artistic movement. And then there is postmodernity, which applying Zygmunt Bauman, which incidentally Drew is in the 3rd episode with James, the sociological approach of what postmodernity is. And Andrew and you and I have discussed this already. Okay. That I would say is probably the best way to approach postmodernism or postmodernity versus then what the internet wants to say about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that helps to simplify it and make sure that people don't get confused about what we're talking about.
That makes sense to me.
Okay. So, are we all clear about postmodernism, postmodernity for the purposes of our discussion?
I believe so. If I have more questions, I will ask.
Okay. Okay. All right. So, Andrew and I have been covering the Cambridge Companion of Postmodernism, which I think he might have sent you a copy, and it's a book of essays.
I think I forgot to send that to you.
Yeah, he definitely never sent that to me.
Yeah,
Thanks,
okay.
Andrew.
I thought about it.
Way to ruin your own show. Way to ruin your own show, bud. You know, I'm here to support you. I probably would have listened to this book.
At least I'm not a guy with 3 names, right?
Yeah.
That's right. I'm very skeptical of men with 3 names.
Okay. Well, Drew's going to be the peanut gallery for a discussion.
Okay.
Tim's like, all right, Drew, we're trying to get to the point here. You just keep drewing up this damn conversation.
Does this remind you of our last conversation at all, Tim?
Yes, it does. Except Drew's sober.
It's true. It's true.
Yes. Mache was a little bit toasted during that conversation.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. So with the Cambridge Companion, I think it's a very good one because it covers postmodernism applied to a certain subject. So, for example, performance art, visual arts, literature, film, which is what we covered last time, science and technology, which is a separate essay. There's one on theology, which is towards the very end. And then there's a separate volume, the Cambridge Companion to Postmodern Theology, which hopefully we can get Shane back on the episode. We can go through that one at a later date.
For sure.
But the one we're going to focus on right now is space. And I don't mean outer space. I mean like physical space, social space, urban space, things like that.
I'm following.
Okay. So for those who are playing the home game that have a copy of it, we're on page 116, the essay by Julian Murfitt, Postmodernism and Space.
Hey, Tim, any chance you could send, or not Tim, Andrew, any chance you could send that now?
Yeah.
In the group chat? And then I could pull it up and follow along with the home class?
Yeah, I'll add it to the group chat. I think it's in my downloads, so I can do that from my phone here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyways, continue, Tim. My apologies.
Okay, we'll do. All right. So I wanted to focus on this one because, what I was saying before about the whole postmodernism thing and how people want to define it any way they want. I do think that definitely with literature, with film, the arts, postmodernism versus postmodernity, somewhat of a separate topic. When you apply it to space, that's the one that's not very well talked about often, but it really does apply to it. And I want to bring in David Harvey, who I covered in the first episode with James. Now, going back to Andrew's earlier point, is that I would not say that Marxists and postmodernists hate each other. I'd say that Marxists have a disdain for postmodernists, postmodernity, because they tend to see it kind of like as mental masturbation, and that it doesn't help what the project is of a core Marxist tradition, which is critiquing capitalism, particularly late capitalism, and coming up with a new form of life opposed to capitalism. So postmodernists would say this is the end result of late capitalist society, where things are kind of in flux. There is I like the term, a re-enchantment of the world. Science is breaking down. It doesn't really explain those kind of things as you did before, and the re-emergence, particularly of like tribalist or localized ways of doing things versus a modernist or globalist approach to things. And in fact, Zygmunt Bauman, the sociologist I discussed in the third episode with James, used postmodernity as a term to describe what was happening with the fall of the Berlin Wall in the early 90s. And when globalization, which we kind of take for granted now, was really ramping up. So one effect of globalization is the postmodern condition, or postmodernity. Make sense so far?
Yes.
Okay. You got the copy, Drew?
I'm adding it right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm waiting on the host to be a good host.
Okay. So I'll just go ahead and begin.
Yeah.
Okay. So on the first page, Murfitt says in the beginning, quote, "The temporal line in the sand drawn between us and modernism by postmodernism's prefix is generally associated with a crisis of historicity. The withering away of the authority and certainty of our historical sense has another side, however, namely the reaffirmation of our spatial imagination. This spatial turn has been variously avowed by many of our epoch's most illustrious intellectuals." Okay, so let's look at the term historicity. Historicity, unlike history, refers to events in history instead of the long history. That's what that means. Okay. Stop me if you're lost. I'm just going to try to go through this as best I can.
Yeah.
Okay. So towards the end of the first paragraph, Murfitt says, quote, "Postmodern space, being precisely their compression into a single complex plane of immanence, whose contours and elevations we are still in the process of mapping." Okay.
I added the book to the chat there, Drew.
I saw it. Yeah, keep going, Tim.
Okay, so I want to go back to David Harvey, who I mentioned in the first episode with James. So David Harvey is a well-known Marxist intellectual who actually is a geographer. That's what his specialty is. And his claim to fame is that back in, 2010 or so? I mean, he is a Marxist, and he's been writing on Marx for a long time. He's in his early 80s right now. So he did a series of lectures which were posted on YouTube for Marxist Capital, volumes 1, 2, and 3. Not all at once, but he did volume 1 first, and then a couple of years later, he did volumes 2 and 3. And he's approached Marxist Capital from many different angles over the years. He's been teaching it for about 40-odd some years, starting back in the 1970s. And because he's a geographer, he has an interesting take on what capitalism does with the lived-in environment and the space in which we find ourselves. And so modernization, going back to my earlier point, arranged the world in such a way to classify it, to order it, to make it intelligible, versus what postmodernist space does, which is kind of like not so much as everything goes, but what we took for granted in the modernist orientation of space is now gone. Okay? So one thing that happened under modernization was suburbia. Okay? If we look at the big urban areas, New York City, classic example, Manhattan was ordered in such a way with the grid. Okay, that was a modernist undertaking. If you've ever been to Manhattan, you know that there are north-south avenues and that there are east-west streets, and each one of them are numbered. Clue to you, Andrew, whenever you go to New York.
Mm-hmm.
That was a modernist undertaking. The suburbs moved outside of the urban areas and were arranged in such a way, subdivisions. Andrew, I don't know if you live in a subdivision up there in Alberta. Do you?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Do you know what I mean when I talk about a subdivision?
Not entirely, no.
Okay. Drew, would you say that you live in a subdivision in Columbus?
No, I live in a neighborhood on a grid.
Okay. So do you know something about the history of your neighborhood?
I know based on the timeline that my house was built, it was post World War II home, and they're all, you've seen it. I mean, it's all the same design. It's on a grid. Mine was added after the stuff in the north, and mine was probably always the probably lower class part, the poorer part of the neighborhood.
Okay. So it was built before the interstate.
Very possible. Yeah, it was 1948 was when it was built.
Yeah, so that's I-81 that passes close to where.
So I go through 71 is
okay, 71.
Yeah.
All right. I'm thinking of 81. That's in Virginia. So I-71 and I-77 are the two that go to Columbus. I-71 passes close to where Drew's place is, and the interstate highway system in the U.S. was built in the 50s. Okay, so Drew's house, he said, was built post World War II, and I guess you could say it was like the far outskirts maybe from the city. But then when the interstate was built, it connected it with the downtown area. So in effect, it's a suburb. Even though it is kind of a low-end, lower-class suburb, it still is a suburb.
That makes sense.
And you're still kind of within the city limits, although not downtown proper.
No, I'm not downtown proper, but yeah, I'm proper Columbus, but it's North Linden, so it was probably annexed at some point. So apparently the way Columbus did it was everywhere they ran the water to, they annexed.
Okay, I got it. All right, so Andrew, how about you tell us about where you live?
I don't know anywhere near as much details about it as Drew does, but I live in one half of a duplex, and it's in like a suburban neighborhood, basically. And the house has been here for, I don't know, probably at least 30 or 40 years, I think. I'm not sure when it was built, though.
What, do you guys have like an auditor site that you can look stuff up on in Canada?
Probably. I've never seen one, but probably.
Okay.
So how far away are you from the downtown?
Probably like a 15 minutes if you're driving, maybe somewhere around that. Yeah.
So you live Fort McMurray, is that where you're at?
Yeah.
Okay. So are you part of the city proper, or are you, I don't know what they call them up there, a township or something?
Yeah, I would say I'm part of the city proper. We're all part of the like Fort McMurray is part of the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo, and then there are other sort of like subdivisions sort of right outside of that. But Fort McMurray is inside the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo.
Okay, and you said your house is about 30 years old?
Yeah, it's fair to say it's at least 30 years old, I would say.
Okay, so your house up there is of newer stock versus Drew's house was built right after the war.
Okay.
But suburbanization started after the war.
Yeah.
And so that pattern has been replicated in many different places all over the world, particularly in North America.
So what was it like before suburbanization?
So you would have had large urban areas. I mean, New York has been a large urban area for a long, long time. Columbus, I don't know what the population would have been. Columbus is the
It was a
capital
cow
of the.
town. Well,
Yeah,
it was I don't. Yeah, it's the third capital though. So the
yeah, it's the
first
third
one.
capital. So
Yeah.
the state of Ohio, and I know this is because I'm from Ohio, is that Chillicothe, which is south of Columbus, was the first capital back when Ohio became a state in 1803. And then what was the second capital, Drew?
Zanesville.
Zanesville, and then Columbus. So Columbus is now the capital of Ohio. And how many people are in the greater Columbus area, Drew?
2 million and growing.
Okay. That includes the suburbs.
Yeah. It's just under 1 million in Columbus proper.
Okay. So that gives you an idea how big Columbus is, including the suburbs. And the pattern was prior to that development, you had smaller cities, you had a lot more towns, rural areas. There were no interstates, but there were like state routes, I guess, and then the back roads. So it was a little more of a dispersed urban arrangement. It was kind of modern in a way, but not really modern as in post-war modern. Okay.
Okay.
So the reason why I'm going through this is to try to explain, to orient what we're talking about with space, physical space. Now that's the physical space. Now in the social space, it used to be that when you had smaller towns, people were more closely clustered together. In suburbia, you could drive to the areas. Now, where I grew up in a small suburb, and it was not downtown. It was about maybe a 10 to 15-minute drive away from where I'm at in my hometown in Ohio. But I played with the neighborhood kids. That was the thing back then. Whereas nowadays, if you were in suburbia, you probably would not find kids to play with. Probably would find them at school or whatever it is. So this is not across the board, of course, but this is much more common than what it was when I was a kid. So that in itself is a demonstration of the change in social space, even though the physical space hasn't changed. I mean, the houses were built. My parents' house was built in the late 50s. Okay, so that was kind of that post-war suburban boom. But the fact is that you could play with the neighborhood kids. I mean, there was a greater sense of social cohesion in the social space. You didn't feel disconnected in any way. And so where Drew lives, because it's the lower end of the economic spectrum, Drew, I get the sense is that you don't really know your neighbors that well.
I'm getting to know them. Trying to. I need to. But I know the ones that I know my little corner well. So I know at least 3 houses to the right and left.
Okay. But you don't know the whole
street.
But you don't know the whole block.
Oh no. Yeah, there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people I don't care to know. That's for sure.
Yeah. So what about in your spot there, Andrew?
Oh, I don't know my neighbors or really anyone around, which actually is like a pretty recent change for me, at least, because I remember when I was growing up, my parents always made a point of getting to know the neighbors and getting us to know the neighbors, and I was really good friends with the kid who used to live a few houses away from me. But now, I guess as an adult or something like that, I don't really know most of the people who live around me.
Is that by choice or by circumstance?
I think kind of some of both, because like some people I grew up with moved away and that kind of stuff. But I obviously I kind of just stopped making the effort to get to know people who live around me a long time ago too.
Yeah. So there's another demonstration of how the social configuration changed, because all 3 of us live in different areas across North America. Yeah, we don't even know our neighbors.
Yep.
So
and we live in different countries, but we're also talking to each other instead of the people around us right now.
That's right. And we're all using English. We're not speaking in different languages.
Yeah.
Yes. Whereas 30 years ago, this not would have been possible.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
So this is a big change. Now, because of the internet, this has helped facilitate conversations such as these and friendships that result from these. But is it real, quote, real in the same sense as it would if you knew your neighbors? You step outside your front door and you go knock on your neighbor's door and say, hey, you want to come over for a coffee or want to watch a movie or something like that?
Not the same, because we're not in each other's physical presence.
Right. So the technology is able to transcend, I use that term loosely, transcend the social space, or rather the physical space, not the social space.
Transcendent in the way that Polish Christian Bale said in terms of LeBron James.
That's why I used it reservedly.
Yeah.
Okay, so does all this make sense? The descriptions of the social space and the physical space and how technology has helped improve certain things and diminish other things?
Yes.
Okay.
It's like a change in environments and a change in cultural conditions.
Right. Okay. So moving right along, back into the essay, Murfitt mentions something about the body, the physical body. Okay. So he says,
what page is this on?
This is page 117, towards the bottom of the page.
Okay.
Okay. So he says, quote, the body for us has less to do with that brute biological substratum of pulsions and reflexes than with the cultural stream of messages that enters and fashions us through the eyes. Now that the human genome is being decoded, indeed, the distinction between biology and, quote, information is rapidly disappearing. Like the rebel characters in the Wachowskis' The Matrix, we are learning how to perceive bodies as so much mobile code. The milieu into which our postmodern bodies are then inserted can best be described through the concept of superficiality. In buildings, commodities, the arts, and the very practice of everyday life, not depths, but surfaces dominate. Surfaces that, unlike the mass-bounding architecture of Mies and Le Corbusier, the solid chrome hulk of the Cadillac, the seductive dreamscapes of painterly surrealism, the depth-portending style of the Joycean or Proustian sentence, the fluvial immensity of the Parisian boulevard, have peeled free from their cumbersome depths. Okay. So his stress here is, instead of depth, it's on the surface. Surfaces reign. Okay. So, Andrew, referring back to our previous conversations, does this kind of make sense when you're talking about surfaces versus depths?
Yeah. Well, especially because they mention the Matrix, and it's like, but like if everything you see is just surface level and you're not really seeing what's really going on underneath, then
Uh-oh.
I think we lost him. For a second, I thought my sound went out.
No, this has happened before.
It's that it's that Canadian internet. They're socialists, so
yeah. There's no depth to it. It's just the surface.
That's right. That's right.
Well, while we're waiting on him, what's your take on this, Drew?
I think it's my take on it so far is, just with technology, which technology is postmodern. We can actually see bodies from more. We have some Hunter Mott said to me was postmodernism is really what science is in a way.
Okay.
And so to me, like, with that in mind, not that I'm going to answer the question, I'm going to do it my very Drew way. What it's saying to me, though, is, there's more information in those bodies. And there's that was kind of what I was getting out of it. But it's basically, instead of like when they say perceive bodies, so much mobile code. So to me, there's a lot of ways to break that down. So I would say there's more than meets the eye, I guess.
Yes. Well, you could say there's always more than meets the eye. However, the stress is more on the surface, the superficiality, than there is on the depth.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Let's look at conversations, for example, which, the flip side of the technology is that we can have more conversations than we've ever had before. But what percentage of those, it's kind of a rhetorical question, what percentage of those conversations really have any depth to them, or rather they're more superficial conversations and kind of scoring points instead of trying to get to a better understanding of something?
I'm going to say a majority of them these days are, and especially with technology too, because we're still missing, most of our communication, which is through body language.
Right. So definitely more superficial conversations and a lot less depth.
Yes.
We think mediated through the technology is that we have a richer experience, and maybe in some ways we do, but in other ways we have a poorer experience.
Yes. Yeah, I think there's definitely definitely a give and a take.
Okay. Now I'll throw a curveball. What do you think Charles Hugh Smith would say about this?
I haven't talked to Charles in a while. I need to talk to him again.
But what do you think he would say? I'm sure he would say that he wouldn't have any. He wouldn't have too many positive opinions.
No, I don't think he would, but I think he'd also see the positives, like, because that's obviously how we all first met. But then we wanted to take things from here or through the internet to, hey, I'm going to be in the area. Can I check out your farm? Which is how you and I met.
Right.
So yeah, I think that there's a give and a take. I don't think you can live on here. I think that's a dangerous thing to do. And I think for me, getting out and I think it's part of too why I've been struggling with the podcast, because I hate sitting at a desk now.
Yeah.
Like I just don't like it. I'm usually in my car driving around and interacting with humans, and I'm out in public a lot more. So and it's changed me on how I present myself on the internet, because who I am in public has changed.
Right. So Andrew, before you dropped out, I was quizzing Drew on his take on conversation and communication, whether he thought that communication nowadays, because it's kind of a blessing and a curse. With this technology, we have a much richer experience than we would have had many years ago. However, in many respects, we also have a poorer experience. Because, as Drew was saying, is that he doesn't like sitting behind a desk and he's not living online. He's interacting in meat space, the term we like to use. So, yes, that's countering to that. But I would also like to add an additional question. I'll throw it at you, Andrew. Is that even though you meet in meat space, would you not say the conversations compared, you're younger than I am, compared to conversations you used to have in the past before the internet, whether they seem more superficial now than they were back then?
I would say that it depends on the person, because if I'm talking with people who I grew up with, who I've been friends with since high school or something like that, the conversations aren't any different. But maybe, like, if I'm talking about someone like my ex-girlfriend or something like that, who is like on Facebook all day long and stuff like that, conversations might be more surface level. So maybe it's more of a generational thing, or maybe it's more of an individual difference thing. It's hard to say.
I think our conversations are partially more superficial, but I think they also have more potential to get on a deeper level.
Oh, that's a good way of putting it.
Because I think it would be hard to find, for example, it would be hard to find somebody with as many similar interests as like we have, Tim. And so when we first hung out, we talked a ton, and then every time we hang out, we talk a ton. And like, you know what I mean? And it's like, we hang out for hours, and it's like, and it's totally different than us just chilling on here, which is even like, we wanted to record in person, and then you're like, I don't know when the next time is going to come. Yeah. And so we were trying to schedule something, but because we know what that experience is, and I felt like we've done pretty good episodes together. So even though I lost one when we were both falling asleep.
Yeah, Andrew, the first one we did, we sat on Drew's porch.
Oh, cool.
For his podcast.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's like and I think it's changing. It's just kind of changing. I think there's potential, but I mean, like, I'm trying to do more video for that reason, because there is more of an interaction. Like, I can see Andrew's body language, he can see my body language. It's not the same as us being in person, but it's better.
Yeah, that's part of why I started doing a YouTube channel and doing podcasts through live streams like this, because partially I didn't actually know, because I guess I'm rare, that most people prefer listening to podcasts rather than watching them. But I just went with that because it's my preference that I prefer watching podcasts, like seeing people's facial reactions with each other, to just listening to them. So that's why I did that.
Yeah, so doing video types podcasts or vlogs, I think in some respects is countering the flattening that has happened with just podcasts. Now, I like podcasts. I've listened to a ton of podcasts over the years.
Me too.
And the thing that I really like taking from podcasts is that it can really, because I also listen to them at a higher speed.
Oh,
like
yeah, I
one and
do
a half or
too.
2.5 times, because
I'm anti that.
because some people, I just can't stand to listen to them at their normal speed, particularly if they're like going off on tangents or whatever it is I'm trying to distill the essence of what they're saying. And I like it because they can compress the subject into something I can do while doing something else, driving a long distance or cleaning the car, cleaning the house, or something like that. And I can easily do that. However, I would also say that podcasts are no substitute for actually reading the texts or reading the books. And this is where, my complaint, going back to the whole thing about postmodernism, is the ideas that people have from them are just from watching podcasts or watching videos. They don't know of the literature, and they're not going to be motivated enough to go read it.
Yeah. One thing,
if you actually read like Foucault, for example, I personally had the experience, at least, of being really pleasantly surprised by how much I like his writing.
Yeah.
I think that's in general. I think with anything, like I agree, you should read and listen to what those people have to say.
Yeah.
My one buddy, he likes to, instead of reading a book or listening to a book, he'll just go and he'll find a bunch of interviews that the author does. And for me, it's like, well, no, I want to get a deeper understanding, because that host can steer the conversation and he's going to be kind. The author's going to be kind to the host. So you don't necessarily get what he wanted to say or wanted to portray. And I think too, you write a book, most authors write books or text to be open to interpretation, because they want to start a conversation.
Yes.
That's a good point.
Good point. Well said. Okay, so moving right along.
I might have to dip out because I got food coming. I had a long day, so I'm being a postmodern Uber Eats order.
Yeah.
Okay. So moving right along, this was the comments about the body. So the author continues, quite unlike the, quote, unreal city of modernism, which seduced even as it repelled, the postmodern city deploys its simulated, self-duplicating surfaces with the goal of repelling desire itself. Continuing, the triumph of surface over depth is best embodied in those peculiarly American theme parks, most famously Disneyland, which is one of Jean Baudrillard's famous examples, where the very absence of desire frees up a delirious artifice, which is glorified as an escape from necessity. Space here is a simulacrum, perfectly realized and objective, alive with connotations, yet utterly divorced from any underlying reference to an original model or archetype. Rather, it replaced spatial stereotypes from a cartoon imaginary. Okay. So anybody want to try to unpack that?
I'm guessing. I mean, for me, what I'm kind of getting out of it is that's why we enjoy entertainment.
Is superficial?
Yeah, it's superficial, and it allows you to escape to a utopia.
Yeah.
And I think too, it's interesting to think about why America is kind of so postmodern, and our number one export is entertainment. So, and here we are, two of us are in America. Give me 1 second, guys. I want to get this food. But sure. That's my first idea. So sorry for being rude, guys.
Nope.
That's okay.
Continue. Okay, Andrew, what do you think?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's
hey, but now you can talk about me behind my back. So
that makes sense. That's oh, that Drew guy, so awful.
Yeah.
But that's basically like similar to what I was thinking. Like the if you go to Disneyland or Disney World and you see all the like Goofy walking around in the theme park and the rides and all the like, it's all a spectacle. Like Drew mentioned Hollywood, it's a huge spectacle designed to get you excited, but you're not really getting to the deeper level of what's going on. I remember being at Disney World when I was a kid and being overwhelmed by all of it, but of course I wasn't thinking about it at this level at the time.
Yeah, I can add to that because I've been to Disney World twice in my life, and the last one was many, many years ago, back in the 80s. So not only do you have what Disney World and Disneyland, and I've never been to Disneyland but seen pictures of it, is that it presents, this is tying into the theme here, it presents a fantasy type world.
Yeah, of
You
course.
look at Cinderella's castle, okay, that's not real, that's from a story. You see the characters, Mickey, Minnie, Goofy, Donald, whoever it is that's walking around, they're not real. They're part of the stories. But adding to this, in particular with Disney World, and this was, I remember Epcot Center. So Epcot Center when did that open? 1980, 81. That's when it was new. So Epcot Center at the time, and this is speaking 30 odd some years ago, Epcot Center had the World of Tomorrow and it had World Showcase. Okay. So World of Tomorrow was something, hey, these are the developments in science. You have the geodesic dome, you have the World of Craft, new scientific developments that were coming out, blah, blah, blah. And then in the World Showcase, what did you have? You had little pavilions devoted to a particular country. Japan, Germany, Canada was there. I don't know if you saw that. And so the funny thing about that is that's where the simulation really kicks in. And referring to the point that the author made about the stereotypes, which is you're walking into Germany and you're not experiencing Germany as it is. You're experiencing a stereotype of Germany. Its architecture, the way it's arranged, the food, the souvenir shops. Then you go over to Canada, same thing. You go over to Japan, same thing. Okay, these are all stereotypes. You get what I'm saying here?
Yep.
So this is where
a stereotype based on, or a simulation based on stereotypes, man.
It's a simulation. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're looking at a stereotype, a simulacrum, and Andrew, we've already discussed about a simulacrum is that it doesn't have a reference in reality. It's hyperreal.
Yeah.
Something hyperreal. So this is the point about you're looking at a space that has no real referent. It's a real space. I mean, you can touch it, but it has no real referent because if you're in Japan and Epcot Center, but then you go over to the real Japan, anybody who's traveled outside of that would know this as, well, this looks nothing like Disney World. Well, no, that's the point. It's a simulacrum type of thing. So this is where this is an example of something that is, quote, postmodern.
Right.
Okay. All right. So no other questions. Let's press along. Okay. So a little bit later on, he mentions here, quote, the Disney Corporation's living laboratory of total urban design, and this is a famous example, in the township of Celebration, Florida, only carries this tendency to its logical extreme and offers a sobering image of the future as a Truman Show for each of us.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Okay, so now we can talk at length about the Truman Show. Everybody's seen the Truman Show.
Yeah.
So we don't need to go on what the plot is, but can you say that what the themes are that he's just covered? Now, Celebration, Florida is a famous example because that was Disney's actual town that they built in Florida. I'm not sure how far away from Orlando it was. It was a completely planned community that was a real place. They had a real address, post office and all that, and the people live there. But when you go there, you get the senses that it's a completely artificial town. It's almost like a simulacrum, more so than you could say even Disney World, because at least Disney World, it's a theme park, but Celebration is an actual place. And then the Truman Show is, what did Truman live in? He lived in something like Celebration, Florida, a completely planned community that was real in a sense, but it was not really real. It was hyper real.
Okay.
Okay. And then you can draw the matrix into this too, is that the matrix with the emphasis depth to it. Okay.
Yeah.
Could you repeat that? I cut out there. You said the matrix with what?
I think he's frozen again. So the matrix is about surface.
Okay, yeah.
Because the matrix is a simulation. Yeah. The bodies are mobile code. You're jacked into it, but the real reality exists outside of the matrix. That's where the depth comes in. So surface and depth. Postmodern is more concentrating on the surface than the simulacrum of an actual physical place. Celebration, Florida, World Showcase, and Epcot, blah, blah, blah. Okay. That's what the points are there. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Make sense so far?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right. How's your meal there, Drew? Pretty tasty?
It's pretty good. Got a burrito.
A burrito? Is it a real burrito? Or is it a hyper real one?
It's
Does it taste like a real burrito?
It tastes like a real one, but it's not authentic. It's just an American burrito joint. Mm-hmm. So it's probably is hyper real. It's very planned.
Yeah.
Hyper real burrito.
Hyper real burrito. That's right. Okay. Continuing on, this is at the bottom of page 19. The author says, quote, "The great ruse of postmodern spatiality is that it hides nothing. Everything is now on show. Individuals are bodies rather than subjects, and acts of literature are texts rather than works. Yet it is precisely in the sufficiency and unreservedness of postmodern space that it nonetheless hides consequences from us, which the ideologies of the past did by lying. By literally putting everything on show, on a multitude of screens and databases, what vanishes is any faculty of critical discrimination, any distance between us and it." Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Comments? Or does it make sense?
So
I think it makes sense.
Is it that we don't know where we end and where the simulation begins, or vice versa?
That's one way to look at it.
Okay.
But again, he's referring to spatiality here.
I was thinking just the way we interact with space has changed. Everybody's their own Truman Show at this point.
Okay.
Everyone wants to broadcast their whole life and share. They want to tell somebody on Facebook or social media what everything they know. And I think it's all kind of tied into what that's what I thought of when I heard that. Was that it's shifting just the way we view space now. Everything's a body, but I think it does tie into the post-capital thought vein, I guess.
Oh, like how that reminds me, Tim, of how Bauman talks about how the way capitalism is organized under the postmodern era is that it's consumerism, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And everything is about consuming. So instead of saying it's an act of literature, just there's nothing sacred. That's what I kind of got out of it. Everything is a text because it's no longer somebody's work. I mean, somebody's not working on this literature. They're trying to get another book out to get more money.
Right. Mm-hmm. That's a very salient point right there when you're talking about literature. So in the past, you referred to something as a work of art, you could say, particularly with literature. It's a novel, it's a poem, it's a collection of poems, whatever it is. It was a work of literature. And an author, even a composer for classical music, is their body of work. All right. So that in itself was a certain kind of ontological category. Now you refer to it as a text, or, as Drew was saying, is about a book, is when an author puts out a book, it's not a work of literature. It's not really, not in many cases, it's not even really a good work of nonfiction. It's just maybe selling something, quite possibly, in many cases. And it's a text. Okay, so a text could be anything that is interpreted, quite possibly. Now, the thing about bodies rather than subjects, so you're not referring to, first of all, a person. In the case of structuralism, now I covered this in the first episode with James, is structuralism doesn't treat persons, it treats them as subjects.
Yes.
The subject, fill in the blank. Now we move from subject to a body. Okay, so, you know, the human body, for example. You're focusing so much on the human body and that the human body is a collection of other bodies, quite possibly, rather than it's a subject or it's even a person.
Yeah, the body keeps the score. That's
Right.
a book somebody told me to read.
Yeah.
I'm not shitting on it, but I'm just saying. But that's like the idea.
Yeah, so a body is definitely more surface than it is a subject. A subject has some depth to it, just like a work has a depth versus a text. Right. So, you know, as he was saying, the postmodern space, it nonetheless hides consequences from us, which the ideologies in the past did by lying. Okay, so rather than keeping something hidden, everything is on display.
Oh,
that's another hallmark of the postmodern.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no secrets aren't really a thing. And when secrets come out, it's a big deal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Secrets come out as a big deal. All right. So continuing on. The author says, quote, tourism is the industrial behemoth behind this process of spatial homogenization, key point. And its logic of equivalence carries across to that remarkable sameness of consumer spaces everywhere, which dictates that every great capital city will now be festooned with the same clothes and the same shop windows, available for the same price with the same credit cards. Multinational boutique and fast food outlets are as much about the experience of non-place as they are about consumption. Okay, so earlier before that quote, he is referring to how a Holiday Inn in San Francisco is as much the same as a Holiday Inn in Harare.
Yeah, it's a consequence of franchising.
Homogenization.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so wherever you go into the world, if you want to stay at a Holiday Inn, you're pretty much going to get what you would expect.
Yeah, you go anywhere. How if you go to McDonald's anywhere in the world, you can know what you'll get.
It's just
more or
Yeah.
less. However, you know, having been to McDonald's in other countries, there are some regional differences.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
For example, you can get a beer in a McDonald's in Europe, unlike in the States.
Right.
Okay. You can get certain kinds of burgers that you would not find in the States or in North America. Some local dishes maybe that have been McDonaldized somewhat.
You know what they call a Big Mac in France?
Royale with cheese.
With cheese.
Yes, but the point of that is the homogenization that has taken place. Not just of food, not just of clothing, pretty much at the same price, but also the spatialization. Holiday Inn looks the same no matter where you are in the world. And so on. So I think all three.
It better. That's the whole. Yeah, that's the idea. That's why I said franchising, because it's to me, it's like the forceful hand of homogenization is franchising.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Drew, let's shift gears a minute, because you grow salad greens for restaurants. So
Yes.
can you speak to homogenization and for salad greens and small farmers?
Yeah, I would say, you know, I think I have to. I'm at a point where I need to have different greens, and I'm working with chefs to figure out ways to do more custom things for them, because I don't want to be homogenized. But the fact that there was a market for me to just jump in is because everybody was using a certain kind of radish, or everybody wanted micro cilantro, or certain crops chefs were familiar with and they wanted to use. And I think, but even when you think about vegetables in general, heirloom vegetables versus grocery store vegetables, I mean, it's a totally different experience. Or even foraging for berries versus the way berries look in a grocery store, it's totally different. I mean, things that usually look really shiny and marketable in a grocery store, in my experience, typically feel very poisonous. So I like different berries. They're really bright in color. and stuff like that. When we were kids, we were always told not to eat those, versus like a blueberry or a strawberry that hasn't been genetically modified to get huge. They have a lot more subtle look to them, or like a lot of stone fruits, or when you look at what humans ate in the wild and what I guess homogenization is done in grocery stores, it's totally different. Every vegetable is supposed to look perfect, whether it be a carrot or anything like that. So I think in reality that's not what we should be eating, and I think it's all about, we've lost our relationship with a lot of things in the world.
That reminds me too of how, like, in the wild, if you're picking mushrooms or something like that, the more colorful ones are the more poisonous ones.
Yeah, so it's similar. I mean, so that's kind of like my take from that. I think what is our relationship with our bodies? What is our relationship with these things? And I think it's, I think postmodernism allows us to be aware of these things, though, in a way.
Yeah, that brings up a good point. So the thing about modernization, going back to the top of the conversation, is that modernity was moving towards homogenization, standardization, classification. Why? It's because modernity is, in essence, it's a movement to impose order upon the world. Okay, that's why standardization, classification, and so on was there.
That's why some people don't like postmodernism. They want more order.
They want more order, right? Now,
that's true.
Now, one way to look at postmodernism is that it's breaking down the order.
Yeah.
Maybe not purposefully, but it's already happening because modernity has reached an end point. It's gone beyond that. Or it's that postmodernism, particularly as the author likes to cover in the essay, is that, and we've seen this point before, is that it's taking it to another step where now it's the hyperreal.
Yeah.
So modernization has already happened. It continues. Now we're coming into the next step, which is the hyperreal. We're only infatuated with the surface. And what Drew is talking about with the vegetables is, how the vegetables and the fruits in the grocery store or on display is to attract customers. Really focusing on the surface is not necessarily on the nutritional value of those fruits and vegetables.
Right.
Or what's in season.
Yeah.
So still on the homogenization, Drew, can you talk a little bit about your setup in the back with your homestead, and did you follow any kind of homogenization, or was it more you had to adapt to whatever you had in the backyard and what your resources were?
Oh, it was both. I mean, we definitely have some order. Having Rich, we just finished. Actually, you haven't seen it. We have everything's raised beds now. But that wasn't the original plan. The only reason why I switched to raised beds was because I was getting older and it was harder to bend down and dealing with some sciatica stuff. So, but also too to handle the waste of the soil from the microgreens. But yeah, I guess you could say it's homogenized, but it's organized, and it's laid out and it was planned. So I guess that qualifies, wouldn't it?
Well, somewhat. I mean,
your blood sugar is fine, Mom. Okay.
Yes, we're not saying that.
Oh, sorry, I meant to mute myself there.
We're glad Mom's okay, dude.
We're glad Mom's
okay.
Yes.
Everybody in the world knows.
Yeah, she's okay.
Yeah.
So
we're not saying that order is bad. We're just where it becomes dicey is when it becomes homogenized. Because homogenization is in some ways good. I mean, like the Holiday Inn example is, what you're getting with Holiday Inn, but something is lost in the process at homogenization.
Yes. Well, I think the human connection.
Yes.
So you try to force a human connection in there, so you want to have good customer service people versus, hey, this guy owns this hotel. This is his business. This is his inn. This is a family business that's been around for generations.
Right.
And I think, that just doesn't exist. So, it's kind of there, but I think more people in our postmodern world, there's just better things to do with your time.
Yeah. So you go to like the self-checkout at the grocery store or
I
the
don't do that,
kiosk at
but yeah.
McDonald's. Yeah.
I try not to do that unless I have to. The kiosk I don't mind because usually there's a big line and I can cut through. But now there's big lines at self checkout and nobody wants to deal with the people.
Yeah, that's funny.
So I'm not even sure why they're doing self checkout. It's so crazy, but it's because they don't want to interact with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess they don't.
Well, yeah. I mean, I told this story, and I'll just share it real quick. Like, I met a guy. He's a couple years younger than me, and he's a college professor in social psychology. And he said he'll have a student that it's like a big lecture. It's for like some general psychology class, and they'll send him these bullet pointed emails with all the issues that they have with him or the class, and he just will respond. These are very interesting points, and I'd love to discuss them with you. When can you come into my office hours? And they just don't respond to him.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
So I mean, that's the I mean, to me, that's what he's talking about. Like it's the postmodern world.
Yeah.
Yeah. Seems to be a manifestation. Okay. Well, pressing on. Let's go to page 121. And the author continues, quote, he's talking about postmodern urbanism now. During what we now think is the high modernist period, which was 1870 to 1929, it was the function of the metropolis to serve as the nerve center of the political, financial, and cultural life of its imperial nation state, and of the newer industrial cities to produce goods to increase the state's wealth by processing its colonial raw materials. They also sopped up the waves of migration from both the decline of the rural agricultural sector at home and the mobility from abroad stimulated by new transportational possibilities. Industrialization, new residential districts for the urban proletariat and bourgeoisie, transportation and sanitation infrastructures, the rationalization of old centers, the commercialization of the street fronts, and many other developments, completely reshaped urban life in Europe. In America, high-rise CBDs, industrial cores and satellites, rings of working-class residences, and an incipient suburbanization confirm the shape of capitalist space in functional, instrumental ways. Okay, so we already mentioned the suburbs that took place in North America, which coincidentally didn't happen in the same way in Europe. But what he was mentioning in Europe is that you had, in particular, the colonial empires. In Africa in particular, the French, the Belgians, the English, the Dutch, and so on. So you had, let's take the English, you had London as the financial center of the British Empire. You had the satellite cities in the Commonwealth, Sydney, Toronto, Vancouver, processing the raw materials from the colonies, sending them back to the mother country. That was the colonial setup. And what happened in the process? Well, those that were in the colonies learned, well, first, they were trying to get away from the agricultural setup that existed before. Maybe they chose to stay there. Maybe they wanted to go to the city or they wanted to go to the provincial capital to get better opportunities. So what did they do? They left behind their old ways, old traditions, and so on. They learned a different language, which would have been the colonial language, French, English, German, whatever it was. And then they became a different kind of person, which then replicated with whatever their descendants were, and possibly they might have moved to the colonial capital at some point. So with the high modernist period, this is what was happening in capitalist development. And in North America, pretty much more or less the same thing except for suburbanization. Okay, so that's urbanization under the high modernist period. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so continuing on. Then he says, what has come to be called urban postmodernism is what followed the failure of this late modern model of bureaucratic city planning in the capitalist world after the late 1960s, after wide-scale working class, black and student protest, the emerging oil crisis, and recession. It has also fittingly been conceived as a relief from the stifling monotonies of state monopoly control over urban form. It implies the relative decline of state investment in urban renewal, and the rise of international capital in the construction and control of urban space. In the first world, particularly in the USA, this has first of all entailed the disinvestment of capital in the classical industrial sector, downsizing, outsourcing, disaggregating the Fortis plant, all spatial readjustments of an industrial economy now globalized. We should return to this notion. And able to take full advantage of cheap labor goods, lax pollution laws, low taxation, parallel production, and other opportunities in the developing world. This restructuration of the urban economy in America has entailed a comprehensive adjustment of the uses and values of urban space. The ever-increasing importance of finance capital, services, entertainment, and program consumerism in the West has impacted profoundly on urban form. Towering corporate headquarters, a glut of office space, cinema complexes, vast indoor malls, all encased in the sheen of a sexy new architecture, no longer merely functional, but, quote, aestheticized for pleasurable consumption. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there.
There is.
Drew, how about you start?
Well, just the end of what they're saying there, the way consumerism is now. I go to the movies a lot. Actually, my buddy, I was going to go with him tonight, and we go to all the theaters around town, and it's been interesting to see how the movie theaters have to evolve to be not only be aesthetically pleasing, but also be more comfortable. Like now, if movies to stay competitive with people that just say, I want to watch, this movie at home or just watch Netflix. Now you have reclining chairs with servers. They serve you alcohol. They serve you food.
They serve you alcohol too?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's how it is in the States. I know you guys are a little bit behind us there.
We're more puritanical here in Canada, except for with weed, I guess.
Hey, I'm not hurting, but I feel you. So to me, I was thinking about that, but not only that, there's the style of movie theaters back in the day were like bright lights, and they're kind of catered to children, but now it's like we're all children. And so everything. So to me, when you look at the way you market things, it's for adult children. So even when we went and hung out at Easton, I was thinking about that fake city you were talking about that they made in Disney, and that Easton's feel is a fake city. They have food, shops, but they have streets that cars can drive on, but it's mainly designed for walking. Everything's outdoors. So, and it's all for, aesthetics, and sexy new architecture, as it says. So, but it makes sense because it's because of globalization. Everything now we can afford to do all these buildings and structures and everything because we have people in developing worlds making all of our bullshit that we like.
Yeah,
right.
Good point.
So let me go ahead and riff on a couple of those things. So if we look at movie theaters, so I'm old enough to remember what it was like before cineplexes, when movie theaters were either one screen or two screens.
Yeah.
So in my hometown, there was a shopping mall, one of the smaller malls that was built, I guess, sometime probably in the 50s, I want to say. Yeah. 50s or 60s. It was a small shopping mall, and it was pretty much, you had your bookstore, you had your pet shop, you had your anchor department store or two.
Did you have an arcade?
It had an arcade, yep. We played many video games there, coin-operated ones. This was way before Xbox. This was back in the Atari days.
Cool.
So the movie theater had two screens, and it was small. You walked in from the mall. On the left, you had the concession stand, which was about half the size of what you find now with a concession stand. You got popcorn, candy, and that's it. You didn't get nachos. You didn't get a hot dog. You didn't get a slice of warmed over pizza. You certainly didn't get alcohol or any of that stuff. You got popcorn. You got candy. Take your pick, or both. And you go into the movie theater, and at best, you probably would have sat through 5 minutes of previews.
Oh, wow.
No commercials. No commercials. Now it's like a fucking half hour.
Yep.
Previews and commercials.
Another thing too is you didn't already see the previews on IMDb, so you looked forward to the previews. The previews was like something added that you wanted to see.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and the theaters were small. You had somewhat uncomfortable seats, sticky floors. You certainly didn't have recliners with a cup holder or massaging chairs or heated seats or any of that shit. You might have had Dolby sound. I mean, that was the big thing back in the day, but it wasn't like it shattered your eardrums when you heard it. But that's somewhat incidental. The big thing, as I mentioned, is that you either had one screen or two screens. You didn't have 7 or 12
or 20
or 20
or 30
or 30, and that's been a big change. Okay. Now about shopping malls. All right. So malls have changed, certainly. You had smaller malls, and now you have gargantuan malls that are almost like the World Showcase from Epcot I mentioned. Something that is, hey, look at this. This is take your pick. This is a German-inspired beer garden or whatever it is within the mall, and it's supposed to provide you with a quote authentic experience or something like that.
I live really close to, I'm like 5 hours away from Edmonton, where there's West Edmonton Mall, which has been the biggest mall in the world at some times.
Yes, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
so
there's like the water park, and there's a hotel inside the mall and that kind of stuff.
Have you ever seen a shopping mall that wasn't like the Mall of Edmonton?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we just don't know what it's like in Alberta there, so we know it's
Yeah.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I live in like a town that has a population of 60,000 people or so, and it's always growing. But they're like, when I was growing up, we had, for the longest time, we only had one movie theater with 4 screens, I think it was.
Yeah.
And we had the sticky floors and stuff like that. But and then in more recent years, we got a newer movie theater downtown that had 6 screens. And then it's only like last year, I think, that we got a much bigger like mainstream theater or something like that up in Timberley, in a different part of the town, that's apparently like the regular massive one with reclining seats and all this other stuff. I haven't been there yet, but apparently it is.
That's how all the theaters are here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how all the theaters are whenever I go to a big city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're like that in DC too. DC's bigger than Columbus. I like it. I still like going to the movies. Just it sucks because all the movies suck now.
Yeah.
But I like the experience. Like, I like going to the big screen. I don't feel so bad when I stream stuff on the internet for free.
Yeah, I still like the experience of going to a movie theater too. Like just sitting there in a dark room in front of a huge screen. And like, one difference between when you're at home is that when you're at home, you can pause at any time and go and get something else to eat or go to the bathroom or something. And you can do that at the movie theater, but since it's such a much more immersive environment, there's more incentive to like sit down and watch the whole movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, another thing too that I like is because there's so many theaters here, and like today's $5 Tuesday. So we would go see a movie, but if we went and saw, we were going to go see the new Hellboy, which I heard is terrible, and I'm sure it sucks compared to the original too.
Yeah.
But there's a good chance we'll be the only 2 in the theater when we go. So if we go at 10:35 at night, it's like we rented out a whole theater for $10, and we can scream at the theater. We can heckle the screen. Nobody's fucking in there. Like, we can do whatever we want. It's hilarious. So like, I think I like that experience, and it's a lot more fun doing, like, acting it like an asshole in a public place with 0 consequences than there, you know what I mean? Than just us goofing around at home. Like, that's equally as fun. But that's part of the postmodern experience, right?
Well, Drew, if you like to do that, why don't you go to a Rocky Horror Picture Show?
Because I don't want to be around all those weirdos that dress up. I mean, it's bad enough when you go to a Marvel movie, but there is something that's there is interest. Like, there are, I mean, hipsters like the smaller theaters. Like, there's a lot more art house stuff, but there's like a bar that has a movie theater attached to it, and they'll show live TV and
Mm.
those events too.
Oh.
But ultimately, it's like, unless I'm drunk with friends, I'm gonna walk there. I'd rather just, even if I was drinking, I'd rather just take an Uber to a nicer theater.
Yeah, I mean, I would too. I prefer those nicer, huge theaters and all that kind of stuff.
Like I'm okay with the evolution of comfortable seats.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about it, Tim.
Yeah, I remember those days when those seats were uncomfortable as all
And
hell.
you're a tall guy.
Yeah.
I'm a big guy. I'm
Mhm.
tall and big, and it's just
I
like,
like the recliners. I'm not lying.
yeah.
I'll take those any day.
Now, I do dislike a lot of people in there that get too comfortable and take their shoes off. And now everybody brings blankets to the theater, which is
Really?
weird. And they wear sweatpants.
I've never
Yeah. Oh,
Wow.
man. But it is a college town. So, like, we'll go to the theater near college and people have blankets and a pillow. It's like, yo, you're getting too comfortable.
It's like, don't
What's
you guys
wrong
have
with
dorm
you?
rooms to go back to?
But again, it's like the whole idea of we're going to do giant Truman Show. And it's like, they probably took a Snapchat and said,
Yeah.
"Oh, it's me at the theater." And then they're like, "Oh, did you look at the Lennox on Snapchat last night? I was there." You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
What did you guys think of the movie? Did you see it? What was happening in the movie?
Andrew, you're missing the point. The whole thing was just to show that you were there.
That's right.
Okay.
If you want to find out about the movie, that's why you go to imdb.com.
That's right. Then you
Okay.
listen, then you read somebody else's review of it, and then you make up your mind from somebody else's review instead of watching the damn movie yourself, which goes back to the whole art thing with works now being called texts, and even like a film is now, I mean, it's just a movie. I mean, it's just a way for Disney, which I'm glad that they hate Disney in this text, to just make more money. That's all it's about, is to pump out more rushed, unplanned garbage.
Disney owns Marvel and Star Wars now, right?
They own all Fox's entertainment too, so I'm pretty sure that means that they own The Simpsons.
Oh, okay.
I think they got The
that's why they
more
did
homogenization to come.
That's why they had to remove Michael Jackson from an old episode.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which,
well, we've been talking about entertainment, but one of the key points that I wanted to cover here is a point that's been mentioned many different times before in the discussion of postmodernism. We see this in David Harvey about deindustrialization and globalization, a couple that to get together. So, as the author was mentioning, in urban postmodernism, it was a late modern model of the bureaucratic city. Okay, then post 1960s is when you started to see more globalization, the decline of state monopoly, which was the state involved in planning for the economy and for the city, and then it becomes deindustrialized. Now, Drew and I, having been both coming from Ohio, we can speak at length about how deindustrialization gutted Ohio in particular areas in Northeast Ohio, where I come from, and in Northwest Ohio. And Drew, you want to say something about the Jeep plant in Toledo?
Oh, I think it's killing Jeep slowly, because it's killing Toledo because it's not allowing that. Our good buddy Charles Hugh Smith likes the forest fire analogy. It's not allowing the old trees to die so the new ones can grow. But I think that's like a big thing is, Ohio is shifting to a lot of more microbreweries, service industry, tourism, because like and I do want to say, Tim, in your hometown, this guy, just a quick side note, I had an excellent summer Pilsner beer. I know you don't really drink, but this guy saw me, and he was from a brewery in your hometown. And he said, "You look like you need a beer." And he's just handed me a beer. And I was like, "I like this guy already." And I drank it. It was delicious. And then the owner of the restaurant ended up being there, and the owner told him where else to go. And I got the guy's email. I got to send him some more places. But, I think, everything's really shifting to sales oriented and more like you want to learn skills. Like, I think it's interesting is you want to learn traditional like trade skills where you can go anywhere and do a trade, but also you need to learn negotiating and sales. I think.
Right, but also the point of this is that this is large-scale manufacturing that went away.
Yeah, large-scale manufacturing created a bunch of towns.
Yeah,
and then also
it's not like manufacturing went away. It just went to China.
Went to China, Mexico, Canada even. So they make the Camaro in Canada now. So the
I didn't know
Camaro.
that.
Yeah, that's a Canadian car. That's an American car.
Or when you talk about globalization is things like Mercedes and BMW that are made in North America. Now, I remember, back in the 80s, because my uncle, he was really big into BMWs. All those were imports. And then fast forward about, 15 years later, 15 or some years later, and I'm driving in South Carolina, and I pass by the big BMW plant. So those are North American-made BMWs. They're not imports anymore.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, even though people in Toledo will still want to debate you about buy American. It's like, well, what is American? Like Honda's new home base is in Marysville, Ohio.
Yeah, has been for many years.
Yeah, so the idea is Honda is more an Acura and a Honda are more American and than Chevy Camaro because they give a ton of Americans jobs and they're made and assembled. They're assembled here.
Yeah.
So that whole argument is, it's postmodern. I'm going to keep signing it in.
That's right. It is postmodern. You can credibly say it is postmodern.
Yes. Yeah. And we have a postmodern president who is Donald Trump.
Yep.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes. Okay.
Who is on the internet. And then we have the rise of AOC and who people like to shit on. But man, is she effective at getting people to talk about her. And that's what's really important in postmodern politics.
Yeah.
There's a right-wing populist and a left-wing populist.
Okay. So pressing on, the author continues. He says, yet this privatization of urban space carries with it less comfortable overtones, not the least of which has been an increasingly draconian approach to control the bodies within it. High-tech surveillance, private security firms, indigent repellent tactics, even strategies such as aromatic and auditory suggestion in consumer space now typify the experience of the realm. On the macro scale, this discipline of everyday life carries over into policing and incarceration, where more citizens, particularly young, quote, ethnic males, are harassed, arrested, and imprisoned than at any time in history. Continuing, urban reconstruction that relies on private investment demands the exclusion of all those, quote, unclean spaces of the other, the homeless, the poor, the illegal, all of whom, like the very presence of the past itself, are pushed outward to the vanishing point of the urban perimeter. Okay, so this one I take as a commentary to homogenization of urban spaces that really try to make it, in one way it's kind of cleaning it up, but another way it's taking away, extirpating some of the elements that made it an interesting place. Case in point, New York City. So New York City in the recent years has been refashioned, even though a lot of the buildings really haven't changed from way, way back, to a place where you have millionaires and billionaires that are owning and living there, kind of a playground of the rich. And what has happened is that the characters that made New York City, like the squatters and the artists and the musicians and things like that, that could live for really cheap at apartments in Manhattan, you don't find them anymore because they've been priced out.
Oh.
Okay. So, and I'm sure that's happened in other places. That's happened in London. It's probably happened in Toronto to a certain extent, and Vancouver and all that. So the late capitalism has been reshaping the space, not just in the physical space, but also in getting rid of the, quote, undesirables in those spaces.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
It's called gentrification.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yes, gentrification. Okay, he also continues, saying, the privatization of public space by international capital, that's the key point, international capital, has meant the erosion and, according to some critics, even the extinction of what used to be called, quote, civil society or the public sphere. Postmodern space also means the liquidation of those vestigial places where, for instance, The middle class of Europe once congregated to forge a collective identity under the shadow of the Ancien Regime. Clubs, halls, cafes, gardens, boulevards. Nothing of any comparable spatial scope has taken the place of these precious arenas of public-private interlocution. Today, if you ever meet anybody at all, it is a fellow consumer, commuter, or employee, or at best a leisure seeker or jogger, and not surely as a fellow citizen. The Starbucks phenomenon is, in this view, nothing but a cynical exploitation of the vacuum left by the lapse of civil society. Okay, so what do you have to say to that?
Well, the only part that I'm a little confused about is what they mean by the Starbucks phenomenon exactly there.
Okay, I can speak at length to this. So, in DC in particular, you got lots of Starbucks. Now, why is that? Because
there's a lot of Midwesterners there that love the taste of burned coffee.
Yes, that's part of it. But it's because of this work thing. Okay, so people go to Starbucks not to sit and enjoy a coffee. They go to like be on their laptops or their phones.
Yeah.
Maybe having a beverage. Whereas it used to be many years ago is that if you went to a cafe, you went there, yes, to have a beverage, but you also went there to have a conversation with somebody.
Yes.
And it could have been somebody that was a different social class than you were.
I'm a big fan of meeting people for coffee when you network and meet space. I think Andrew, you should try to find some locals that you can have coffee with and talk.
I've done that on dates before too.
That's the best move for dates, coffee, because if they because here's the thing with alcohol, it gets expensive, and also too, like, it's just it can put your relation, it can put the two of you intertwining on a rocky start for multiple reasons. So I think coffee is a safe bet. It's inexpensive. You can see if a woman can carry on a conversation or not. But even then, I think if there's a local person that you're interested in networking with, hey, let's get coffee, and then you can talk to them. So I'm a big fan of that, learning in these real estate circles I've been going in, because it's the thing a lot of the old timers like to do, and I live my life like an old timer, so it works well.
He's an old soul.
I'm an old soul.
But let's talk about cafes for a minute. So it definitely is the case in DC. You find a lot of Starbucks, and in fact, side story, just up the street from where I live is the border of Maryland. I'm close enough to the DC border, so there's a metro stop up there, and it leads into Tacoma Park, Maryland. So there was one small cafe near the metro stop that served, I want to, for lack of a better term, even though I hate this term, is craft coffee, customized beverages. And then there was another one further up on the Maryland side. Then there was a restaurant that opened up that serves coffee, but it's a well-known chain restaurant and people go there to eat. Then what happened? A Starbucks opened. And no surprise, within a year, that small cafe closed up.
I could have called that.
Yeah. That's a given. Now, number one, there's no way that the small cafe can compete against Starbucks. Why? It's because people will go there to drink shitty coffee, and they will go there to be on their laptops and their phones.
Mm-hmm.
They know what they're getting when they go to a Starbucks. We know this. Homogenization. And some people go there to talk. That's not to say you can't go to Starbucks to talk, but you go up to Ohio, back to my hometown, in particular in Columbus or some mid-sized cities or whatever it is, you're going to find more local coffee places than there are Starbucks.
Yes, it's amazing.
Yes. Now, why is that, Drew? Can you shed some light on that?
One reason is, Columbus is we are the #1 test market for food and fashion and all this other shit. But we really embrace local. I think we don't really like a lot of chains. And I know Pittsburgh's similar. I just went to Pittsburgh for the weekend, and Pittsburgh even more so doesn't like chains, but it's a smaller city.
Why do you think that is?
Because we want our city to have character. We don't want it, we're here for a reason. A lot of people, I feel like, find themselves going to LA or DC or New York City or the real metropolises of the United States. I think a lot of it is for work. doing. I mean, that's why Tim lives there. But you like DC too, which is weird. So,
well, the thing I've always liked about DC is that I wanted to be in a big city, but there's no way in fucking hell that I would ever live in LA or New York.
And Columbus wasn't what it was when you first moved there. And we talked about that quite a bit, like how your direction in life could have went different if Columbus is what it is today.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten to know Columbus more since I've known Drew because he lives there, and I have to say that I really like Columbus. My girlfriend really likes it too.
Yeah,
she didn't think she would because she had, she's from North Carolina, and she always had this picture in her mind about what the Midwest was like. It's just, it's true that there's a lot of open space, particularly as you go farther west into Indiana and Missouri and places like that. Just
or Northwest Ohio.
Yeah, Northwest Ohio is just wide open space, and a lot of it is rural. But Columbus is an interesting case. If I ever moved back to Ohio, I definitely would go to Columbus. I don't think I would go anywhere else because I've seen Cleveland, I've seen Toledo, I've been to Cincinnati. Don't like any of those places as much as I like Columbus.
And they're all different.
Why don't you like? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Drew.
Well, I was going to say, so we really embrace local, and all these cities have a different character, but Columbus is like an island of, I mean, Charles Hugh Smith and I talk about Columbus and Pittsburgh are like islands of entrepreneurship. Like there's a feeling, there's still like a huge Appalachian influence, but then there's also another influence. There's West Coast influence. So we have like 40 breweries. So we have microbreweries are really taking off in Ohio. Yeah. Even in Tim's hometown, they have a bunch of breweries there now. They have like 5 or 10. And they're good.
That surprised me, yeah.
And they're really good. I mean, they have good beer. And so I think we want to be proud of where we're at. So I think, to us, Starbucks is a Seattle company. And also if you go east, like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, there's Dunkin' Donuts too. So Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks are big competitors with coffee, which is weird. Yeah. And here I'd probably, if I was going to go pay for a coffee, it'd probably quite honestly be at Speedway. Or I'd probably go to like Crimson Cup, one of our local establishments for coffee.
Yeah. Andrew, how many Tim Hortons are up where you are?
Oh, we have Tim Hortons. I like Tim Hortons more.
Yeah, too. I like Tim Hortons too. I'll take that over Dunkin' Donuts.
Absolutely.
I think there are 3 or 4 here.
Okay.
Yeah. I actually though, this is an interesting thing about Tim Hortons that Americans might not know is that
McDonald's bought their coffee source.
Yeah, McDonald's coffee is better than Tim Hortons coffee
because they bought their old source.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
yeah, I know that.
Kind of a postmodern thing too. Now that I think about it.
Well, Tim Hortons is a Canadian institution.
Yeah, but their coffee is not good.
Okay, well, what would you say is the best coffee then?
I don't know if I had to pick a place. I'd probably pick like Second Cup maybe, but we don't have any of those here. But we don't have any like small coffee shops or anything like that here either.
Well, Toronto is kind of something that got me onto it, and then it came to Columbus, and it came to the West Coast too.
That's what I found. That's what I found was interesting when I saw that, because Tim Hortons I always thought was a Canadian company. Right?
Yeah.
So I first learned about them back in the early '90s when I was watching the CBC because their commercials run all the time, and then I started seeing them in Ohio. I'm just like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
What's Tim Hortons doing down here?
Well, he was friends with Dave Thomas, so all the original Tim Hortons were attached to Wendy's.
Okay.
And now, oddly enough, Burger King owns Tim Hortons. So
there's one of the Tim Hortons in town is still attached to a Wendy's.
Yeah. And fun fact, Andrew, the corporate headquarters of Wendy's is in Dublin, Ohio. It's a ritzy suburb of Columbus. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
They had the original Wendy's for a while, and then Columbus let it go to just because Columbus wants to build a bunch of fucking condos. It's just super getting annoying. But condo life, man. Half the people want it. They're good for my business, even though I don't like it. You know what I mean? They're good. They're good for my industry. Like I talk to chefs about this a lot. They're good for us work wise, but as people, we hate it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, condos everywhere.
Yeah, and it's all
part
like
of that homogenization of the urban space. These fucking condos going up everywhere.
Lifestyle communities, like they have a goat which is like, it's actually, they have decent food. It's like a sports bar,
Mhm.
and they have booze and food, and they're always attached to communities. You know, they're living lifestyle communities. So they have the urban style, and then they have the suburban style, which you have less shared walls, less shared space.
Mhm.
So, and even if you own a condo within the community, you still can go there. So it's like an interesting, I think it fucking sucks, but a lot of people like it. So, and I enjoy the goat when I do go there, but I don't know. I think that communities need to be less artificial.
Yeah.
And so I think
postmodern.
Yes.
yeah, and I think, you know, something that is like the counteracting of it, of maybe the postmodern, is now people want to have a different relationship with their everyday. So like they say the Starbucks, whatever he said about Starbucks, now the Starbucks phenomenon. So now it's like roasting beans. People want to drink coffee now, or they know the beans are just roasted.
You know
They
what?
don't want to have.
You know what my favorite way is to have coffee? To grind my own beans in a coffee grinder and brew it in a French press.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to do that, and then I got a little fancier and hipster, and I was doing a pour over. And then Rich and I consumed too much coffee. He liked the French press, so I like the pour over. And then we just decided to get a coffee maker, which makes pretty good coffee. But I'm not gonna. We use our organic beans. Tim's had our coffee.
Yes. I can attest that it is excellent drip coffee.
Okay.
Tim's had some working at Drew days too. So,
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, yeah. So the Starbucks phenomenon, I think, I don't know. Like, to me, there's always we're in the middle of postmodernism. So I think that
that's why, you know, I try to stress whenever I talk about postmodernism, is that it's not focus less on postmodernism and focus more on postmodernity.
Postmodernity, yeah.
The state of affairs, a condition.
Yeah.
And what we're reading in these essays is just one description. It's a perspective of what postmodernity is.
Yeah.
And not necessarily what it's becoming.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not this philosophy or this approach to things that, you know, logic doesn't apply or whatever it is. No, don't even go there. Just look at postmodernity and state of affairs.
It's not social justice warriors trying to bring down power structures.
No. No.
Cultural neo-Marxists.
Cultural postmodern neo-Marxist. No.
Yeah.
Don't even go there. No. Okay. So I would like to press on.
Sure.
All right. So the author continues. The intrusion of electronic media and the internet into our daily habits of communication has only confirmed the mediation of personal intercourse by multinational capital, which stifles spontaneous or traditional uses of space in a virtual realm, formless, indistinct, and nocturnal. This has led to what Stephen Connor calls I love this, quote, telematically permeated sedentariness of contemporary life.
What the fuck does that mean?
Okay, telematically, operating through screens, permeated sedentariness, meaning that you're sedentary, you're not moving, of contemporary life. So in other words, instead of going out in the meat space, what are you doing? You're on the computer talking, chatting, Facebooking, Skyping, whatever. That's it in a nutshell. Okay, so, but he continues. Lest I be thought to be suggesting that this elimination of public and dirty space by corporate capital has somehow been entirely successful, it remains to be said that all of this is restricted to only the choicest zones of international development, and has gone ahead cheek by jowl with perhaps the most destabilizing factor in the entire postmodern scene, namely the mass movement of bodies across the globe. Democratic shifts out of all proportion with historical precedent, which now invest the urban sphere with an incalculable diversity of cultures. Okay. Now, if this isn't a slap in the face of diversity, I don't know what is.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what is he saying? So this reshaping by international capital of the urban space only really takes place in certain areas, like London, Paris, DC, San Francisco, whatever it is. Okay. And so the people who live there, who can afford to live there, can take advantage of some of the pros to this. But what's the underbelly of this? The underbelly is that you have mass migration, immigration of particularly third world immigrants coming into those urban spaces. And as has been pointed out many times, you're looking at Europe in particular with the migrant crisis is they come in, they're not integrating into society. They are on the public dole, welfare benefits, and then they form their own little enclaves within those cities where, if you're talking about Muslims, Sharia law applies, and they're not abiding by whatever the laws and the social customs are of the places where they're at.
Right.
That's the underbelly of it.
Right.
Okay. So we've heard this in the news before. This is nothing new.
Yep.
And the cultures that are there, cheek by jowl, I like that description because the diversity is already there, but there's no assimilation that's taking place.
Yeah, exactly.
And he further on talks about things that have already been in place for many years, like Chinatowns, little Armenias, Koreatowns, and so on.
Oh, there's an interesting point about that I was just thinking about. My brother lives really close to Chinatown in Vancouver, and
Vancouver.
Yeah, exactly. There are so many Chinese immigrants there, and a lot of them refuse to learn English. So a lot of them, even
So they
my
learn in French?
No,
I'm just kidding, because it's French and English.
Even my brother, who is he's way more progressive than me and all about inclusion and diversity and that kind of stuff. He's complained because some of them are trying to make it a law that signs around that area have to be in Chinese. Like, even if you're not in Chinatown.
Yeah. As if French wasn't enough, now it has to be in Chinese.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm actually surprised that hasn't happened already, given how many Chinese are in Vancouver. I've never visited the city, but I've certainly kept abreast of it in the news. And I know that's the case in Toronto, in particular, or I mean in Canada. In Toronto, what's the biggest ethnic minority that's there?
I'm not sure.
West Indians. I saw a lot of Indians when I was there.
Could be. It's probably like Indian or Asian of some kind. I mean, that's usually the case in a lot of major cities. I think, at least in Canada.
Yeah. Drew, are there any ethnic minorities, enclaves in Columbus that you know of?
Oh yeah, Bexley's all Jewish pretty much. It was never annexed by Columbus, and it's surrounded by Columbus, and it's kind of more rough urban areas.
Okay.
We have the third densest Somali population in the world, and they're kind of all over at this point. But there's a lot of pockets of them where it's affordable housing.
Is that because of some kind of refugee resettlement schemes from
Yeah, so apparently Columbus is a sanctuary city, but it's not a sanctuary city. And most cities in Ohio are. So I guess we have some very friendly asylum laws in Ohio. We have a bunch of Mexicans that live here. They buy, but there's some traditional ones too. There's Hungarian Village. Then there's German Village. So there's a German Village they have good German food. But now it's
been there.
Yeah, no, and actually I sell to some restaurants there, so now I have a reason to go down there. Because you were like, I remember that was something you guys were going to German Village. I'm like, I'd never go to German Village.
Yeah.
But now I sell to 3 restaurants there, so I do. So, and there's some good there's good restaurants there, but it's also more older style homes that are older than mine, brick built, and it's designed for people, not cars. And I think another thing too that they haven't necessarily pointed out is when you look at big kind of postmodern metropolis, modernity post-modernity metropolises, I guess. Is that the proper way to say?
You could say postmodern. I mean, one thing we covered this in some earlier episodes is that the thing about the postmodern is that you have also cheap by gel many different styles of architecture. I mean, you look at London as an example, is that no Roman, well, that's not true. A couple Roman structures exist, but mostly what you find is a mixture of 18th century Georgian, 20th century, and now 21st century, all mixed together. In the case of Columbus and her German village, those are old brick style houses from the 19th century because of the German immigrants. And those are mixed in with, 20th century suburban type developments and then whatever new high rises they got going on downtown. So,
okay.
Yeah. And then, but they're also designed for people when, if you look at Detroit, so I went and visited a good friend in Detroit, and she loves her city, and she was like, what do you think of Detroit? And I was like, I never really placed my finger on it till now. Detroit was designed for cars.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of cities, like a lot of the industrial cities, like I know Toledo was designed for cars. I'm sure Cleveland, Cincinnati less so, but now it's taken on.
Well, Cleveland not so much because Cleveland itself was from the 18th century.
So and it was also designed after, I think, Manhattan originally, or New York City.
Yeah, and then Cincinnati has a lot of walkability because that was the gateway to the Midwest before Chicago. If you
it was because people would march their hogs to actually go because they had the biggest slaughterhouses in Cincinnati. So they got
the slaughterhouses too. But you mentioned what it is I like about DC is that in DC proper, what's called the Old City, that's a European designed city.
Yeah.
So it's very walkable.
It has the largest underground in the world, I'm pretty sure too. DC does, from my understanding.
The largest underground?
Yeah, like subway system.
Oh,
like
no.
Over body mass.
There are bigger subways than that.
Oh, maybe it's London I'm thinking of. I don't know.
Yeah, London is probably the biggest, if not the oldest. And Istanbul is old too, from around the time as London.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But Berlin is an example of a city that's got it beat in terms of public transportation.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, I was just reminded of what I wanted to ask you, Tim. Why is it that you decided to live in Washington, D.C., but you wouldn't want to live in L.A. or New York?
Well, L.A. is definitely a city designed with a car. You need a car to get anywhere, even though there is a public transportation system. Second of all, I don't like L.A. because of, what's there, the smog, and I just don't like Southern California, period.
Okay.
New York is okay, but New York, I mean, there's just so many people piled on top of each other, and I find it oppressive.
Yeah, I agree.
I find it oppressive. Not to mention is that it still has got a grimy feel to it. Now it's a lot cleaner. You look at pictures from New York in the 70s and 80s, it's a shithole. It really is. And so it's come a long way since then. But still, it's got that grimy feel to it. It stinks in certain spots, and it's just, again, I find it oppressive.
Okay.
It's very authoritarian, stop and frisk, all that shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
High taxes and high cost of living too. Not a good thing.
No.
All right. So yes,
moving forward.
That is the underbelly of this reshaping from international capital. All right. And so yes, financial speculation is financial speculation. We already know that. Okay. All right. So that's it for urbanization. Now let's get on to the last section, which is globalization. Our author continues saying, quote, "The postmodernization of space has to do with this steady erasure of everything not modern and its absorption into our mode of production to the point where the social so saturates the global object that it is increasingly difficult to imagine any outside to it. And tourism, the leisure industry, cynically claims for itself those vestigial spaces of otherness hitherto feared and desired as the, quote, heart of darkness, so that literally nothing is beyond our ken in the context of an adventure holiday. Yet there is no tidy break between a modernist conception of world space and a postmodernist one. And the history of the 20th century was one of broadening horizons of global consciousness." Okay, so he's putting a fine point on the fact of you can't say there's a break between modernist and postmodernist, really.
Yeah.
You know, referencing Bauman, Andrew, is that he dropped postmodernity for liquid modernity. Why?
Yeah,
Because he wanted to stress that modernity is still with us, modernization is still continuing, but liquid means that there's no solid, nothing firm anymore. It's all
right.
fluid.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking.
Yes. So space, the same thing applies to this. Instead of a sense that there is a solid space to things, it's flux, fluid. Even though, and we're talking about space as like a concept, instead of, you know, you drop yourself in Fort McMurray, drop yourself in DC, you drop yourself in Columbus, and you still have a sense of physical space. You know,
Right.
there are houses, you know, you can touch them, blah, 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 type of thing.
Right.
All right. So then continue on. He says, the fallout of the global epoch of imperialism has been a veritable deconstruction of the old political maps of empire. This is with a capital E. But within the context of a now almost incontestable stranglehold over planetary space by a single mode of economic organization. Postmodernism is, in this spatial sense, the complete modernization of a hitherto unevenly modernized world, bringing previously extrinsic, wild and backward spaces within one integrated system of exchange and accumulation. Okay, so then some people will point and say this is the neoliberalist project. Instead of how it once was decades ago, where modernization was uneven. You had the first world, the second world, the third world, and you still have that. But the first world is still the first world. The third world is on its way to the second world, if not the first world now, than what it was decades ago. And you could even say is that parts of the first world are slowly regressing back to being like in the third world, with places like Portsmouth, Ohio. You know, deindustrialization took place, and now you had the opioid crisis.
Tell you what, they just built a fantastic highway going down to Kentucky, though, for the first time ever. Even though Reading Route and Route 23 has been going on for probably the last 200 years, making this trip, or maybe at least 150, making trips from northeastern Kentucky or coal country all the way up to Detroit. And traditionally, you had to drive a car through a bunch of small towns, but now there's highways that take you out to go to Columbus. So you don't necessarily have to hit the Portsmouths, where you can go 70, 75, and then also coming back in to go to Kentucky.
Yeah.
Okay.
So with that reshaping of the urban space is that you can do it much faster and you can bypass a lot of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Or take it writ large is when they talk about flyover country here in the US is you have the coastal cities and other places like Houston, strategically placed within the heartland of the country, but the rest of it, particularly coastal liberals, they don't care about it.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that's the same thing in Canada, Andrew. I would say it probably is when you have Toronto, Montreal on the East Coast, and then Vancouver and so on the West Coast. And where you're at is kind of comparable to flyover country, I guess, in Canada.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe. I would say so.
I mean, does Ottawa really pay attention to what goes on in Alberta?
Well, only because we have a huge oil industry here.
Yeah. Besides that, we know that.
Yeah.
That's what you guys have there, okay? Oils and lots of fake testicles on the back of trucks.
Oh yeah, that's for sure.
That's where we all know that's where all the Canadian rednecks live, is in Alberta.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Lots of single moms too.
Yeah, single moms too. We won't get into that. That's another postmodern.
That's a different essay in this book.
It's volumes into itself.
Today we are going to cover the essay on single moms.
Single moms, yes.
Yeah,
okay.
then we'll have Stefan Molyneux getting all angry.
Yes, he will.
Because he hates single moms.
Yes. Okay. So
I like single moms.
Our author continues. If the modern was in retrospect the great period of class upheaval and the industrial division of labor, then the postmodern can be seen as the spatialization of that division of labor, with the attenuations of class struggle consequent upon a geographical displacement and reification of hitherto merely sociological divisions. Slavoj Žižek has intriguingly speculated that Americans no longer think in terms of class. point, not because, as so many speculators in the post-Marxist camp have argued, the traditional working class has disappeared or been absorbed into white-collar services, but because the American working class is now China, with the messy business of production magically transported to convenient territories out of sight and out of mind. The first world, thus, quote, cured of the most potent threat to its internal equilibrium, can congratulate itself on having solved the problem of history. When Francis Fukuyama entitled his famous work, The End of History and the Last Man, his covert and unspoken premise was that such an opportune, quote, end of history had been enabled precisely by the spatial displacement of previously historical antagonisms. Okay, so what he means there is, with modernization and industrialization, you took people from the agricultural configuration into the city, into the industrial configuration. And then this is where Marx comes into the picture, because Marx was a product of his time. Marx talked about the class struggle, particularly in industrialized societies, the class labor between the workers and the bourgeoisie, and blah, blah, blah. Now that has changed, it's financialization, it's globalization. And now, as we mentioned earlier on, is that there still is industrialization. It's just not here. It's in China. And the rise of the service economy. So some of those class divisions, and why Americans in particular don't like to describe themselves as or like to describe themselves as a classless society, is because they can think with material abundance that they did not have decades ago, that they're solidly, quote, middle class, even though they're probably far from being middle class. Rather, they're like good compensated working class. Now, where we come from in Ohio is when you had the industrial base way back in the 50s and 60s, and my dad was part of that. Drew's dad was part of that too. You can make a really good wage, if you could support a family on that wage, and so on. But now that's gone. Unless you're in a high-paid service sector like I am, being government contracting and all that, or you're doing something completely different like what Drew does, being an urban farmer.
Right.
That's one reconfiguration of something that he can do where he's at, versus going to work for the man in phone sales, which he will never do. He'd rather put a bullet in his head. I know that.
Yeah, we've talked about that.
Yes, or any kind of a service job. He likes what he's doing.
Yeah.
He's found his niche.
Yeah, service jobs too.
For right now, I don't mind service jobs. I think they're good places to go learn things, but ultimately, like, you want to be providing people service jobs. I think if you want to provide jobs, or you want to learn some skills that can apply for you to run your own business.
Right.
We do have a listener.
Go to the trades, learn to make shit, repair shit.
That's right. That's right. So this is something I got a listener in from Australia. He'll probably want to come do the show sometime.
Sure.
He went to the weekend of Thaddeus Russell with me. He said he's big into postmodernism. So he said, my main concern so far would be to think about whether the second agricultural revolution is or has been to convert humans into livestock. Consider how much corporate America benefits from the prison system, particularly privatized prisons. What are the limits to the space a market can engulf? And then I think, how much does loneliness come in when we flood the economy with service jobs?
He's all over the place on that one.
He is, yeah, but he sent me a bunch of texts, so they weren't necessary. You were in the middle of talking when he sent some of those. We might have to go back a little bit, but
we might want to put that in the parking lot, because
parking lot.
Okay.
That's a corporate America term.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? I didn't even know that.
Yeah. Let's put it in the parking lot.
Let's put it in the parking lot. We're gonna revisit these questions, Nick. We promise. Shout out to he's the Tangent General. So he's he's got a great podcast. Yeah, okay. It's the Transcendental Tangent General.
That's a mouthful.
It is
interesting.
And then you gotta hear him say that in an Australian accent.
Oh yeah. Oh, that sounds way better.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay. So pressing on with the author, he makes a very good point in this next quote right here. He says, globalization then is that integrated circuit board of contemporary capitalism that has divided the globe into so many distinct spatial segments. The better to organize and squeeze profits from the flows between them of objects, people, data, and money. In everyday life, it seems increasingly impossible not to find oneself caught within a worldwide web of spatial threads, eating Thai food, wearing garments made in China, vacationing in Cuba, driving a Korean car, singing karaoke, drinking Australian wines. It is often as though our every act of consumption draws us into a palimpsest of places we may never visit, but whose effects and determinations are now inescapable and, at least at a subliminal level, call out for their own cartography, which never comes. And then an additional quote. The general implication is that through the experience of everything from food to culinary habits, music, television, entertainment, and cinema, it is now possible to experience the world's geography vicariously, as in a simulacrum. The interweaving of simulacra in daily life brings together different worlds of commodities in the same space and time. But it does so in such a way as to conceal almost perfectly any trace of origin, of the labor processes that produce them, or of the social relations implicated in their production. Okay, so in other words, because of globalization, we are now able to consume these things like never before. Eat Thai food, drive a Korean car, watch Japanese movies, whatever it is. We can do that. We also are doing them in the present time and in the present space. I can watch whatever I want to on the internet in my own little place here in DC. You can do the same. Drew can do the same in Columbus. You can go to a Thai food. You can find Thai food, or you could eat Korean food. But you don't know where the origin of this stuff came from necessarily. And all of this is just kind of mushed together across space and time in part of this globalized mush. Whereas before the globalized world, if you wanted to eat Thai food, you had to go to Thailand. If you wanted to drive a Korean car, you had to go to Korea. So on and so forth. That's the upshot of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, makes sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So pressing on, the author continues. Space, not simple commodities, is what contemporary or late capitalism has most interest in producing, regulating, representing, and marketing. And this is pushed through the straits of a contradiction between an abstract representation of space on the one hand, maps, charts, graphs, plans, statistics, and all the other means of reducing spatial qualities to figurative quantities, and an intensifying differentiation on the other, territoriality, new social movements, multiculturalism, ethnic partitioning, etc. While everyday life appears actively engaged in the spatial diversity and micropolitics of this latter movement, the direction and logic of the system is governed by the former, which because, quote, the encircling networks of multinational capital that actually direct the system exceed the capacities of any perception, eludes representation in everyday consciousness. If we detect this glacial, abstract production of space at all, it is only allegorically, in those very buildings, cityscapes, fortuitous television and internet conjunctions, and cinematic narratives of conspiracy, through which some dim trace of the true proportions of the totality is glimpsed. Anybody want to unpack that one?
I don't know. There's so much there. I don't even know.
I think it goes back to homogenization. Like there's it's nice that now because of globalization, I can go and get pho across multiple areas of Columbus, and then I can even have an opinion of what's good pho and what's bad pho. Mm-hmm. The one I like to go to is my tailor, who's Vietnamese, or as her daughter says, fresh off the boat. That's what her daughter says. But we get along well because they're not too different than the culture that I come from, which is hillbilly culture. So, they grow their own food. They're used to raising animals. They use a lot of Thai basil, which that's not necessarily the same food. But it's a similar culture and in different ways. So the way that we look at the land, I would say, or the way we have a relationship with our food.
Mhm.
So, but I like supporting her business, but if it wasn't for globalization, there wouldn't be much, I wouldn't have so many options, or for sushi, or there's a lot of Koreans in Columbus too. So there's different kinds of Korean barbecue. So, yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of, I think it's good for food. I think I mean, ultimately, there's a lot of influences. Most influence in food comes from the French. So it's actually nice to get a blend of other mixes too in here. And Western culture, I would say, comes from the French. So that's, I mean, that's kind of unpacking it. It says a lot of other stuff, but I think it's still like a lot of homogenizing is what it's talking about.
Okay. Andrew, what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, just what I was thinking about when Drew was talking there too was like how you see fusion with fusing different cultures and their way of cooking into different cooking styles, which you see a lot now too.
So, and something I want to say, just because you said fusion, is I think that it's funny because there's a sushi place that's designed after Chipotle called Fusion. And then we also have another Asian place that's designed after Chipotle style, which is called BB Bop. So I think that's what is that Asian? It's but it's like bowls, it's good food. And then there's another one called Piata, and that's a Italian style that's kind of also the take on Chipotle. So those are local franchises that have popped up, and now they're spreading. I think they're spreading across the United States now, but they all come from Columbus.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Oh, cool.
So related to this quote earlier on, actually afterwards, the author quotes Henri Lefebvre, who was a well-known French Marxist geographer, who is mentioning about, now the thing about space, because at the beginning of the quote is, space, not simple commodities, is what contemporary or late capitalism has most interest in producing, regulating, representing, and marketing. Okay, so since capital C is globalized, it is very interested in commanding whatever space it finds itself in or where it's projecting. Okay, so shifting gears a minute, let's look at what America does militarily. Okay, that's force projection across the world.
Mm-hmm.
The countries where the bases are located is commanding the space. Even though, I was in the army and I was stationed in Germany, it occupied former Wehrmacht barracks. It didn't build that. That was already built. But it commanded that space.
Right.
And then when it withdrew from there, it just turned it back over to the Germans. But that's still that force projection. Right. Now, in particular in the third world, building those holiday inns that we mentioned earlier on, homogenization, that's also commanding that space. Because you have customers who want to go to the Holiday Inn, but you also have people that are part of the Holiday Inn, business customers or whatever, who also are moving and not having to worry about the local strictures on them for hotels, or more importantly for currency or customs or passports or anything like that. So this is global capital in a sense, through financialization and to a lesser extent with a global military force, reshaping space.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens. Now, as we saw, the underbelly of that is things like the migrant crisis.
Yeah.
Where they come in, and Bauman even talks about this with his critiques of globalization, is that it's not the people that float at the upper levels that are the tourists, the ones that are flitting from place to place, the multinationals. It's the ones on the ground, the localized ones, who are having to deal with the fallout from the globalized actions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that, you could say, is part of postmodernity, consequences of that.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So continuing on, we've come to the end, and here is a long one that I would like to close us out with. Okay. So the author says, In one of his late publications, the philosopher Jean-François Lyotard sketched out a, quote, postmodern fable. There he imagines that liberal democracy, having proven itself as the most workable political and economic system the human species is ever likely to produce, successfully manages to reproduce itself for millions of years into the future, managing the ecological and political government of the planet for countless generations, until finally, the sun nearing the end of its expected lifespan, the descendants of, quote, man, still existing in the perfect, untrammeled equilibrium of liberal democracy, design and construct a spacecraft that hurtles our brilliant descendants into the void of deep space, that they may spread the gospel across the entire universe. Lyotard meant this as a secular version of paradise. It may, however, strike some of us as a vision of living hell. Liberal capitalism, per se, is only 300 years old in its oldest bases. Elsewhere, it is but a generation away from having supplanted despotisms and feudal monarchies, or lives in uneasy symbiosis with forms of clerical fundamentalism. Its primary value has been to rationalize social space, sweep out the feudal cobwebs, and reduce quality to quantity, for the purposes of instrumental reason and the profit motive. But everywhere it imposes homogeneity and standardization, liquidates the past, and ruins collective identities. Lyotard's glib refusal to accept this terrible abstraction of space as the price paid for capitalism's perpetuity signals his blindness to what will surely be a period of worldwide political upheaval now that the gospel of the New World Order is being squared by billions of people with the poverty of everyday life in a system entirely dedicated to consumption. The contradictions inherent in postmodern space will eventually dictate a global political reckoning. Whether or not the final result of this is, quote, liberal democracy or something as yet unimagined remains to be seen. Okay, so in other words, this liberal democracy, this globalization and homogenization is not without blowback.
Yeah. It's sort of me, when you were reading there, I was thinking that's like a good way of summing up like the postmodern era and the postmodern condition in general. And it was making me think of Bauman's term liquid modernity again, like how the world is changing and we're fighting the changes that are happening, but in some ways we're like it's changing without us realizing that it's changing, and it's like it's like the liquid modernity is a good term because it's like you're not sure where the modern starts and the postmodern begins, because like you were saying, it retains some aspects of the modern.
Right. And you know, when you stop and think about it, it's sobering when you look at that, because take me for example. I have benefited from globalization in some respects, but I also know what I give up or what the costs are involved of living in a globalized society. Would I ever want to be a jet-setting world type to do that? No, particularly as I get older, because I want more of a sense of rootedness in one particular place. Now, there's not a whole lot that I can do about how the culture has changed. And I'm old enough to remember what things were like. Our discussion about the movie theaters, two screens versus a Cineplex. Okay, I mean, there were some benefits of having two screens, but there were also some cons. I like the nice recliners. I like the better refreshments, and I like the better sound. Okay, but I could do without 30 minutes of the advertisements for sure. And I would prefer that the Cineplex, in some respects, I prefer that the Cineplex be a local instead of a chain, or that there were more localized shops. Like we talk about the coffee shops. Okay, I wish there were not as many Starbucks, but there's really.
I was just thinking when I met your girlfriend for the first time, her and I sat in that coffee shop and talked for a good 2.5 hours because you were waiting to check into your Airbnb. That was a good time.
It was, yeah, and that was a local place, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but I think you get the sense of what I'm talking about with the rootedness. And Drew, I would say that you probably feel rooted there in Columbus, and you would prefer that versus if you were a jet setter or something like that.
Yeah, as of right now, I mean, the only other place I'd probably move to is Pittsburgh.
So, yeah, which is not that much different from Columbus.
No, it's a smaller version. and but I mean, because Columbus has grown so much, if it ever gets to the point to where it's not a city I want to live in anymore, that's probably where I'm going to go.
Yeah, the hipsters take it over.
Well, you know, I'm a different kind of hipster. I was trying to explain Columbus to the Pittsburgh people, and they were like, none of them. Of course, we were at this. Pittsburgh's cool too because they still have bars you can smoke in, and they have cigarette machines.
That's like
I remember seeing that.
Yeah. That's illegal here.
And what is it is here too?
No, it's smoking bars.
Yeah, it's that most areas in the United States now. And they also had a CD player jukebox, and this was on Polish Hill, so this was in a Polish neighborhood, traditional Polish neighborhood, and it was called Gooski's. And shout out to Gooski's, man! I had a great time there. It was cheap to drink. It was cash only. They had an ATM that barely charged you anything to get money out, to give them money. So I mean, it was an old school punk rock style bar. So I fit right in. It was a great time, and I was just like, man, like that's to me a neighborhood bar, and they don't exist anymore because everybody wants, the goats of the world, but I like grungy dive neighborhood bars.
Okay.
Yeah. How about you, Andrew, up where you're at?
In terms of bars?
Just in general, like neighborhood.
Yeah, in terms of, I mean, do you have a sense of rootedness in Fort McMurray, or? I would hazard a guess is that there's a part of you that probably would like to get the hell out and go somewhere else.
Yeah. No, I've been thinking that more and more in recent years. I actually am planning to move like to Toronto or Vancouver or somewhere like that, like in the next year or so, hopefully, actually.
Okay.
So,
I like Toronto. Toronto has a nice neighborhood feel to it. It's a big city though.
Yeah.
Montreal has more of a sense of historical neighborhoods, like Ultramont does.
Yeah.
I really like that.
Well, but then you got to deal with French Canadians.
Yeah, that's true. But they're a hell of a lot better than Parisians.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's like the French Canadians are, I'm sure, the biggest reason that there's so much French architecture and culture in general preserved there, because they're very
rooted
to their exactly.
Well, I wouldn't say that. Now I've been to Montreal twice, and if you go to older Montreal, you see that. But Montreal is just ugly.
Oh, okay.
Because it has a lot of 60s concrete type architecture, brutalist type architecture. You see that in Toronto too, and especially in the wintertime, because Montreal gets extremely cold, and when you're looking at that in dark days, it just really depresses you.
Oh, okay.
That's my sense.
Right.
Nick said he's leaving the vid because he thinks we're wrapping up, but he posted a copy of a book he's reading now called Liquid Modernity by Zygmunt Bauman.
Oh, that's the one we were talking
to.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So so he's familiar. He'd be way better to talk on this subject than me, but we'll have to add him in next time, Tim. I told him he'd really like you, but
okay.
Anyways.
Sure.
All right, and that's all I got for this essay. So, do you think that we have done an adequate job? I mean, there's a lot more that people have written about postmodern space and urbanization, and what this does for everyday life, and rootedness, and to refer to Bauman is that dealing with the space and dealing with the consequences of what happens with the urbanization is definitely a localized problem that is a fallout from the globalized policies, particularly for financial capital that's worldwide globalized.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mean my opinion is, globalization isn't going away, but it's just we need to think less about what's going on globally and more what can we do here locally, because that's something you can control, and that's something you can take part in.
Yeah, and there's almost no choice. You cannot help but deal with the local.
Correct. When was this essay written? I'm curious.
So early 2000s? The book, I mean, they were all published at once. So the book was published
okay,
2004.
Okay, yeah. So So this is actually pretty interesting because I think a lot has changed since 2004, and this is pretty much spot on with what they said they see happening.
Yeah,
and it's happened.
Yeah, and then you look at with Bauman, he was writing his first book, which is a good one too, is Intimations of Postmodernity, and he wrote that in 1992. That's when he proffered his sociological theory of what postmodernity was, and then he later dropped it for liquid modernity in 2000 with that book. But I covered that at length with James, but maybe we could revisit that in a future podcast if we want to continue with postmodernism, Andrew, is that we could investigate that. What is the sociological theory of postmodernity, and see if Bauman was spot on about things.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but that's all I got, gents. So
right.
we have completed another essay in this collection.
Yes.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, so all that's left, I mean, we can revisit literature, but there's one on science, technology, and postmodernism, and then
ethics against the metaphysics of comprehension.
Yes, ethics, and then I think post-religion. Law and justice, maybe we could do, but I'm kind of on the middle. I'm in the middle with that.
Okay.
But I think the next one good to cover would be science and technology.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Okay, Drew, would you like to come back, or you? Is this?
No. I'd like to come back, and I'd like to bring Nick Ulbrich with me because I think he dove pretty deep and was grilling Thad about some postmodern concepts on the live podcast that he did with Brett when we were there, and Thad was getting frustrated because I don't think he expected it to come at him like that.
Well, some people were peppering Thad with questions on him too. I think Thad, to give him credit, has a much better grasp of postmodernity, because I saw that debate between him and Stefan Molyneux, and Thad definitely was the winner on that, if they're quote unquote winner. But Thad is
way too sure of himself.
Yeah, but Thad has his limitations of what he understands by the notion.
Yeah, he's never I've heard him say on I think on one of his podcasts when he was talking to Connor Habib, he said he's never gotten into Deleuze at all, for example.
Yeah, but Deleuze is kind of a separate subject too. I mean, everything that we've been covering here, we haven't really touched on Deleuze.
No.
We've mentioned Lyotard, which I would say is probably if you're a rank beginner in terms of postmodernist writers, you go to Lyotard first.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't even really mentioned Derrida. We've mentioned Foucault in passing here and there, and that's it. Mm-hmm. The rest of it has just been, all of these are active scholars, some of whom are like in English or in literature or in science or whatever it is, all trying to write something of what their understanding of postmodernism is, postmodernity.
Yeah.
And that's it. You can't single out Derrida, Foucault. These are the high priests of postmodernism. You must attack them. You must bring them down at all costs.
Yeah.
We know what that line of attack is.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think it's important that we're going through like all of these different writers and all of these different perspectives on postmodernity, postmodern condition, and postmodernism, and every different variation.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, I'm ready to call it a podcast.
Yeah, me too. I want to go to bed. I'll see you guys. Thanks for including me, Andrew. Tim, it's good talking to you again, man.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks,
so
guys.
We'll have you on next time, and expect me to be there sometime in either June or July.
All right, sounds good. I'll see you then, bud.
All righty.
I'll just say all the stuff I like to say at the end of my videos here, and then you guys can give any plugs or last words there. So thanks everyone for watching another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. Hope you guys found this as fun and interesting as we did, and thanks so much to everyone who has subscribed to my channel, and to those of you who like and share this video, and especially to those of you who contribute to me on Patreon. I really appreciate that, and I'll put the link in the description for this video like I always do. And yeah, like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe, and most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all. All right? Keep having mindgasms, everyone. And any plugs or last words there, guys?
You can check out shows that Tim and I have done together at samplehour.com.
Yep.
And
Listen
also, what's that?
Listen to Drew's podcast. That's my
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right,
And
guys.
check out those interviews that Tim did with James Sullivan on James and the Giant podcast too.
Yes,
Absolutely.
and Drew, that's your homework for next time. You got to get through parts 2 and 3 with James.
Yeah, no, I definitely am going to. I sent him to Nick as well because I think you and Nick could actually. Nick has a show too. He might have. I'm sure if he likes it, he'd have you on to. You should check out. Oh yeah, check out the Transcendental Tangent General. That's a cool show. It's
Transcendental Tangent General, right?
Yeah, the audio's. Nick was already 8 episodes in when I met him, but the audio levels are really quiet at first, so you might have to turn up your stereo if you're listening to it in your car. But great, it's a great show, and I really appreciate Nick's worldview. So
cool.
Shout out to Nick.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys, and thanks for watching, everyone. And adios until next time.
Adios, muchachos.